Welcome everyone to the
Just me?
Tuesday, May 9th meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. Quick review of the agenda. We've got some meeting minutes to approve. We've got some invoices to approve. We'll get an update on our, I think we'll get an update from the MSBA. Is that?
Yes, so we'll have meeting minutes and invoices. We'll update on a couple of the milestones for the MSBA. Just a short update on some of the additional meetings that occurred in the last month since we were last together. We'll have a short presentation on the MEP.
MEP, right, okay.
And as part of the meeting update, we'll update on the tours that the team went on to 3 schools in the area, as well as discussing some of the design updates and some additional tasks and where the status of those is.
Okay, for some reason, calendar's being out of whack. I felt like we'd already done the tour summary, so I wasn't sure if we were looking at an old agenda, but that was probably another meeting. So, all right.
Last meeting was 2 days before the tour. That was the,
Oh, there you go.
that we talked about. Premonition.
I'm just not used to not seeing all of you
You
for
talked
this
about
long. It threw me off. Okay, so we've got some minutes to approve. So we have the minutes of the April 11th, 2023 Elementary School Building Committee meeting. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at those. Does anyone have any questions, comments, edits, etc.? Hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the meeting minutes of April 11th, 2023.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, got a motion by Mike, a second by Leah. We have, it looks like, I should have said this at the beginning, it looks like we have Mrs. Carver participating remotely, but given that Mrs. Carver is not a voting member, I think we can still vote normally. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? None. So it is unanimous and so carries.
Which I believe is 5 this evening.
6? 6.
6. Yep. You throw me on that every week.
I know. We try to mix it up for you, Chris.
Maybe we sat in a row this time. Yeah.
That's true. We did. Okay, so next we have approval of invoices, and we have 2 invoice packets that came in, so bear with me as I...
Given that the last meeting was a day before our standard reporting date, we weren't able to get out our BIP before the last meeting, so we're approving both March 2023, or we're suggesting approval of March 2023. I don't want to get ahead of myself, and also April 2023. We were able to advance that so that we could review it tonight.
Okay. So the first one is... So wait, which one is the one dated May 9th? Which one is the one that you sent out?
That came out today was for April 2023.
Okay, so we'll start with the March, which is the one that came out with Chris's email.
Yes.
Which has 2 invoices in it, one for Vertex, one for Perkins Eastman. The invoice for Vertex number OPM 11612 is in the amount of $13,860.75. The second invoice is to Perkins Eastman. The invoice number is 95420-00.0-7 in the amount of $24,410 for a total amount of $38,270.75 in this invoice package. Any questions or comments about the invoices? Okay, hearing none, I would like a motion to approve payment of the March invoice package in the amount of $38,270.75 as indicated in the meeting packet.
So moved.
Motion by Bill, is there a second?
Second, sir.
Second by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it is unanimous and carries. So next we have a second set of invoices, the April set of invoices. The first one is payable to Vertex in the amount of $11,015.25, and that is invoice number OPM-116-13. The second one is payable to Perkins Eastman in the amount of $73,205 even. Invoice number 95420-00.0-8, bringing the total invoice package for April to $84,220.25. Any questions or comments about the invoice package? Okay, then I would seek a motion to approve the April invoice package in the amount of $84,220.25 payable as indicated in the meeting packet.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Leah, second by Mike. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Nope, unanimous. And so that also carries. And we will now move on to, now that we've done the kind of administrative stuff, the MSBA update, so I'll turn it over to Bergen.
So as last we met, we had been responding to the MSBA comments. If you recall, at the end of March, we had presented in front of the feasibility assessment subcommittee. They reviewed and commented on the overall submission of the project. From there, we received the formal response comments back, which you would have seen at the beginning of April without our responses. We've now replied back to them, included a copy of that within your meeting packet. Since then, the MSBA board took their action on the end of April and approved the project to proceed into the schematic design phase for the 3-grade enrollment of 1,195 students. And as of today, they sent over their certificate to sign the agreed upon enrollment. And so we'll be circulating that around the town for signatures for the larger enrollment of the 3 grades. And off to the races with schematic design.
Any questions about that? In an email conversation that happened earlier today about the that MSBA design enrollment certification, I suggested I think it might be a good idea if we do some sort of media release about the project moving into schematic design. Probably worth highlighting that the MSBA certified the enrollment again at 1195, more consistent with the projections, just so that we continue to get the positive word out there about the project. So if there are no objections, we'll execute something. Okay. All right, so then next, I think, looks like tours summary.
Just before we get into that, we had a couple of smaller meetings that I just want to note for the committee so that you're aware of them. We had our first full school security meeting to discuss the finer points of school security. I won't go into depth on that because it's obviously something that is very critical to the importance of the school and how it will operate, but it's also something that we don't want to advertise into the public realm. We also had 2 focus group meetings related to the MEP development, and so we'll report more on that at the latter part of the presentation. And on the 15th of April, we went on school tours, and I think we have a slide put together for that, right?
Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to run down and invite anybody that attended the tours to add color or comments, but what we tried to do is just capture some of the highlights, some of the things we heard. The tour started at the Ames, Blanche A. Ames Elementary School in Easton. Some of the things that really stuck and were desirable that were seen there were the outdoor gardens. I tried to capture some photos. They're not necessarily the highest quality marketing type photos, but some of what we saw on the tours. The gardens in particular, or the outdoor spaces, were really designed to do a number of things. In this case, we all saw that the rainwater collection on the roof comes down a rain chain, follows a pebble path, and becomes part of the wetland or water, stormwater management, kind of an implied bridge that's also part of that landscape. Wonderful outdoor spaces, outdoor learning, covered spaces, covered tables, benches, some of the things that we've been hearing about. Don't have a picture, but the art rooms that we saw there and the media center were also preferred. The media center specifically featured a pivot wall, so it created, within a media center space, the wall could be open or it could be closed to create professional development space. So that was something that we think is pretty applicable to the project. And then, you know, the one of the major features there is there was a focus on universal design concepts, even a main ramp as opposed to a main stair for the school. This is an early childhood center, so that ramp was also used as an educational tool. It was very interactive, so there were some inspirational things. The second school that we saw was the Zervis Elementary School in Newton. Here we saw the classrooms and the outside of the classrooms breakout areas, which were pretty close to some of the things that we've been talking about here and desirable. In the rooms, we also saw features of the classroom with dispersed whiteboard, with natural safety, like a get out of sight space that's just natural within the room. So those are things that seem to generate interest. Here we also saw lockers, student storage out in the corridor versus in the room. That's something that we've been talking about. In this case, they were enclosed lockers of a smaller size, so they were scaled. And one of the last things, I think, between both of the schools were the cafeteria space was also received a lot of comments, both this school and the Clyde Brown School, which was the third school that we saw. And so moving on to Clyde Brown, this one, I think the approach, the materials, the feel was something that received a lot of responses and comments. These photos don't do it justice, but a nice natural feel and scale, wood look materials upon approach, as well as the different types of masonry on the building, natural colors. The main office was something that we also focused on, some of the details of how it works from a safety and security point of view, but the just natural visibility, the openness. And of course here we also saw airport style toilets and some common sinks, or at least that was talked about. I'm not sure if we saw it in this school specifically. Can't remember.
Yeah, we saw
We
it.
did,
We
yeah.
did.
Yeah.
They had two different sides, just to describe that. There was two different types of bathrooms. One where facing the hallway, there's an entire bank of 6 sinks kind of facing the hallway so teachers can monitor the students so there's no mischievous. And then it's an open door bathroom to the actual bathrooms themselves. So there's not a door that's being opened, so cleanliness is kind of observed there. And the teachers can monitor what happens at the sink and hear what happens in the bathrooms themselves, even though there is privacy maintained.
Yeah. And I don't know if anybody wants to add any thoughts or comments or anything we missed. Just a few highlights.
Just one note, both Ames and Zervis are Perkins Eastman projects. To give credit, Clyde Brown is a TAP A project. Vertex was the OPM on that project.
So we got to talk to a few of the teachers in some of these schools when we did the tours as well, and the open kind of community space in the middle. I was curious on how that's used. And they use, each school that uses it for many, a variety of things, but it does get used. That was my kind of question. Are people actually using these tables in the middle of a hallway wide open? And the teachers were really supportive of it. It was new to them, kind of a new process for the teachers that we spoke to. So they were still figuring out kind of their way around if this classroom's using it, sign out stuff. Right now they're doing first come, first serve, but they really all spoke very highly of it to do some project, I guess, based learning and stuff like that. So I thought it was kind of cool to see. We've talked about it a bunch. It was kind of cool to see it in practice and know how it's used. So that was neat. I thought the cafeteria spaces were great in both, much different spaces. That we looked at in each of the schools, but each you could see the function. If you're looking at the Zervis Elementary School, that cool kind of ceiling, not only is it kind of cool to look at, but their stage is there, so the sound was kind of really great in that wide open space. So function behind design, I guess.
Yeah, there's big mechanical units where the ceiling sweeps
Yeah.
down, so it's all integrated.
On the Zervis, the first bullet point, could you explain that a little bit more? Did I misunderstand it? Like a disappearing whiteboard, or what did you mean by that? And a safe zone in relativeness to what?
Okay, yeah,
Thank
thank you. Sorry, I speak about that so much, I'd probably take it for granted. Dispersed whiteboards, so a classic school might just have students facing forward, one main teaching wall, but in more modern schools, what we see is dispersed whiteboards, so there still is a main teaching wall, but having a whiteboard on each of the 4 walls allows students to break out into groups. It even gives the teacher preference to maybe teach from different points within the classroom. We usually dedicate 1 full wall to storage, and even that wall can have a marker board because we saw some examples where it's a sliding marker board. So it just creates opportunity within the room. The safe zone is in response to, there are many layers of safety and security and lockdown, and we also like to breathe natural measures in, more passive measures. So in the classrooms that we saw, you can see in the photo up at the top, there's a good amount of glass that looks from the classroom out into the corridor, but that doesn't compromise safety. In fact, it's actually good from a number of perspectives for safety. But in an incident where you would want to get out of sight within the classroom, there is a triangular space shown in that superimposed floor plan there. You can see a kind of a ghosted in triangle.
Okay.
Where even if you don't pull a shade, you cannot see that zone from the corridor, so it's a natural safe zone.
Thank you.
Any other
questions?
I'm curious about the common sinks. Like, I've been to a lot of different countries and stuff where the sinks are placed in a way where you wash your hands, you go to lunch, you come back, you wash your hands. So I can see a lot of opportunity for having those sinks in the hallway as opposed to in the bathroom, but I was wondering how they're actually being used. Like, is it specifically for bathroom usage, or have they incorporated kind of more of a pattern of, hand washing into the school?
We didn't inquire about the latter, so it's mainly associated with the bathroom, but there is that open airport style as you approach the cafeteria itself, because there's always that group bathroom right adjacent to those large assembly spaces. So there is the opportunity to do that without having to go into the bathroom. It's an indent from the hallway, so it's not truly in the hallway, but it's adjacent to the hallway. Walk in without touching anything, can wash your hands, and then walk out. We've all lived use the paper towel to open the door. Like, you don't have to do that here. You can wash your hands and freely pass to the cafeteria.
There was concern in Millis amongst the building committee when they went on that it wouldn't be well received because it was so different, but that never really materialized.
Okay.
And Millis also opened just before the start of the pandemic. So one of the things that they benefited from was it reduced touch points.
Right.
And the little that we've had a chance to sort of review with them after the fact, it's been helpful in terms of supervision because you can hear what's going on very clearly, but you can also see the places where they're pulling too many paper towels or they're making a big mess with the sinks. You have clear view of that from one staff member who can also hear what's going on. And we know from the conversations that we've had with the schools and from other schools that bathrooms are often an area of concern when the students are in there. And so
Never.
it presents a sort of a enhanced way to monitor those areas, even though it's a different configuration than you may be typically used to.
Okay. Thank you.
Any others? So I'll say, Tim, I appreciate you pointing out the piece about the common spaces, because I think for a lot of people, given that this is the elementary school, if you were a high school, those common spaces naturally make sense, but so to hear the way they were being used, I think is really helpful as we get into the design for those spaces. Okay, so now we are into systems.
So we're going to bring Jesse back up, who you've met a few times.
Assume the chair.
Yeah, also wanted to note, we've got Jeff Rowland and, Nicole Simpson, both from the Hopkinton Sustainable Green Committee, who we invited specifically for this presentation. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for Jesse. If there's no objection, I'd also like to invite both Nicole and Jeff to ask any questions as we go through the presentation, so feel free to jump in. Okay? Thank you.
Fire away. All right, so thanks for having me again. We're going to do a little bit of a recap. You know, I think the last we met was in December and talked about all this stuff. So we've obviously reviewed a lot of information that early in the design. But we wanted to recap to show you this is what we had discussed was important to you at the time when we did the survey. So we've kind of kept that in our mind as we've been putting together the more details that we've walked through in the past or in the previous months. So the high priority items were the low EUI, which is energy use intensity, acoustics, air quality, life cycle cost, and future adaptability. So really, not that the other ones aren't important, we really have focused on those particular items as we review this discussion with you tonight. So just another portion of recap, we did review 4 options at the time. So we had the full, option 1A was a full electric ground source heat pump system. Option 1A, which is really 1B, was electric VRF system. Again, another way to electrify, but in a different type system type. And 1C was a hybrid of those two, more of a cost management strategy, which we've kind of kept, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the future. And option 2 was the natural gas boiler chiller VAV, similar to what you have at Marathon. So just kind of carry that as a common theme. So that's what we had discussed and reviewed last time. We have further refined the distributed ground source heat pump options. So we completed the first phase of the project. That's what's carried in the estimates is the full ground source heat pump scenario. And to give a little more detail, this is a schematic here that shows how it works. It's a little bit maybe confusing, but wanted to show you just basically what that system looks like. So every classroom, I don't know if this mouse works. Yeah, the mouse does work. So every heat pump or pair of heat pumps will have pair of classrooms will have a heat pump unit that would do the heating and air conditioning for that space. So it's like a refrigerator with ductwork on it. So air goes into the room, comes out of the room, we heat or cool through that mechanism. And that heat pump is where the efficiency comes from and where all the work occurs within the system. Secondary to that, or we say decoupled from that, is the fresh air system. That's this big box up here on the left-hand side. It's what delivers the ventilation air to the classroom space based on the occupancy of the space. And so if there's a classroom full of students, it'll be delivering its maximum amount of fresh air to that space, and it's decoupled from that. So the two systems operate independently of each other. And we can control that through occupancy and CO2 sensors and other air quality measures as well. So that's what that system comprises of. There were some questions as Chris mentioned earlier. We've had 2 deep dive conversations on the system with Tim and with Susan, and Chris was a part of those as well, talking about this system in more detail of how it might apply to your town and what it might look like and what the concerns might be from other folks within the town. So the library system came up. If those are familiar with the library has a ground source system, but it's what's called an open loop ground source system. So it's different than what we're proposing here. So we went through and discussed the pros and cons, and we're not proposing an open loop, which does have issues that come along with it. This is a totally closed loop system, so we're not as worried about the quality of the water that's coming out of the ground because the water is contained within the system. We still have to treat the water, but we're not worried about in and out of what might come out of the ground. So that kind of helps that issue go away. There's another way to kind of get a better feeling of the system. We did a tour of Buckley Elementary as well. That's the school in Connecticut that we designed. It came online last summer, and they opened for school in August. So Tim and Chris and myself went down and kind of kicked the tires on it to really show what's in my head so you can see it in person, to get a feel for what the heat pumps look like, what the fresh air systems look like, and how it's distributed throughout the school. And that was a renovated new facility. It wasn't new construction. So we had a different set of challenges with it that we were doing than we do with here, but similar but different kind of scenario. So I gave them the opportunity to go down there and ask questions and just kind of get a feel for what it was. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
So
Chris?
Tim and I went down one afternoon, and we were able to walk through it with both Jess and the construction manager for the project. We got sort of an opportunity to see the real life examples of everything that you see in the diagram here. And it was a good opportunity to sort of see how the system works and a lot of the small details that make it operate efficiently. For instance, walk-in refrigeration always has those condensers that go with it. They put those on the geothermal heat pump, but they had different pumping systems so that if you needed to leave that on, you used a smaller pump to circulate water so that you were using less energy for full-time loads versus the pumping system that would work when the full building's operating and you're controlling the heating. gave us an opportunity to look at a couple of the different things that they do, because they did extensive net metering throughout the building so that they could understand their energy use and present that to the students as well as the community. And so we could go back and look at things like that weekend that we had in February and understand how the system that's probably about a third of the size of what we're proposing, but how that functioned as it related to an extreme cold day, which, although more rare, still happen in New England, and also how it's producing energy to offset the energy that it's using. And so it was really helpful. It allowed us to sort of understand how the components that you see on the screen could fit into the classroom. I don't know if you want to add anything, Tim.
I think just what the components are, you know, so this is my first time getting to tour this type of equipment, and it's at its base, it's not that different than what we're running in a you know, a typical boiler slash HVAC building. The energy that provides it is different. How it's working is different, but the components are essentially the same. So when it comes to kind of my end of it after the fact, maintenance-wise, it's not anything that, you know, it's not rocket science to figure out how to get these things kind of fixed. It's pumps and compressors and that type of thing, stuff that we deal with kind of daily already. So so I was happy to see that it wasn't simply for something that's so efficient. The simplicity of it is amazing. You know, I thought it was going to be this big complex thing, you know, monster of a thing that we'd never be able to wrap our arms around, and it's really not. It's I mean, simple on the way it functions.
I mean, there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's just like the perfect system.
Yeah.
Any facility we do, it comes with its pros and cons, and we discuss those at great length. We call it a distributed type system. So the heat pumps are distributed throughout the school to heat and cool the building, whereas maybe you're used to more of the chiller boilers, a more centralized approach, and we send water around to do it. So it's a different way of doing the same thing, and so it does bring along a different kind of maintenance, but the schedule of the maintenance and the routine of the maintenance is the same. Filter still has filters everywhere. I mean, if you have unit ventilators or whatever, you still have filters everywhere to change. So there's some things that are common, but the compressor part is probably the most unique part, distributed throughout the school.
So one thing, you said the water still needs to be treated, which sent
Yep.
me on a total tangent
Yep.
because
Yep.
I have a well.
Yep.
So the water here tends to be hard water,
Yep.
right? So does that mean there's going to be some kind of water softening so that it doesn't leach copper or whatever out of
No,
the pipes?
I mean, it has to be, you know, when you put water in a closed loop HVAC system, we have to get the oxygen out of that water. So they pump chemicals into it to really get the oxygen out so it doesn't eat up the inside of the pipes and rust the
Okay.
inside of the pipe. So it's really nothing to do. You would never drink the water. It's not meant to drink. It's
Well,
totally
yeah.
closed, but there is maybe a different level that comes into it because it's harder water, but it's nothing that's, you know, it's like
you don't
every
have
other
to
school in the district.
continuously maintain. That was going to be my
Yeah, I
question:
mean,
is
so he would,
adding
so,
chemicals
right, so
regularly?
the discussion we always had was, okay, well, how often should I be looking at it? Well, as often as you do anything else in the district. There's nothing unique about this loop that says you need to do it differently or on a different schedule. Like, so if you do it once a month, great, do it once a month. If you do it once a quarter, do it once a quarter. It does need to be checked. I mean, it does have to be inspected and making sure that the chemical levels are correct, because if those do go out of whack, then that leads to all kinds of other problems over time. But it's not unique to the system. It's unique to HVAC where you'd have those kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Dan was Jess was able to highlight for us as well how the closed loop works and the opportunities to monitor it. Because it's a closed loop and you're not heating it to boiling like you would with a boiler, you don't lose water as frequently. So you can monitor the water inlet with the controls package, and if water's going into the system, you know there's something within the system that has to be investigated. And so it gives you that extra level of control, and so you treat what's within that closed loop after the backflow preventer, and when the system's operating properly, you shouldn't see water movement into that system.
Once it's filled up and closed, it's closed. It only is an issue if water escapes the system, if there's a leak or a pipe breaks or we have to change a piece of equipment, then where water would be introduced back into it, and we'd have to double check those values. But again, regular maintenance keeps you out of problems like that.
And we currently treat our heating system water with a company, an outside company comes in and does that for us, I think monthly now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions about that?
I think the other part was I think the water loop itself, the temperature range of that geothermal loop is only from about low 40s
Up to 95.
up to
So
95.
it's a very,
so you never
very small
get
range.
to the heated boiling levels that you get to in a boiler system, which is when a lot of those deposits start to come out of the water.
And so when you, like in a traditional heating system where the boiler involved, that water heats up to, old style system to 180 degrees, which is very hot, which leads to a lot of expansion and contraction within piping systems. It leads to stresses and failures within piping systems. So you don't see as much of that fluctuation in piping systems because the temperature's the band of that temperature range is very stable. So the typical equipment that you would see throughout the school are these vertical heat pump units, as you can see in this picture on the left. So we went into a couple of the closets that we have at the elementary, so Tim could see this is the space it takes, how you get to it and maintain it, how you change the filters, all of that stuff. So again, so we could kick the tires on that and see how much room they take. They're pretty compact pieces of equipment. There's just, again, we have to distribute them throughout the school. You don't put them all in here and serve rooms on the other side of the rooms outside of the school. They all want to be in that general vicinity of the areas they serve. So we've been working with Dan and Bob to locate strategic locations for this equipment within integrating that into the floor plan. So that's part of the ongoing schematic design effort that we're doing right now.
And the function that those have is space temperature controls, and they're independent of the fresh air system, which operates differently.
Right, so if the fresh air system fails, shuts off, whatever, you still heat and cool your building with this thing. So it has nothing to do with that. So it keeps it independent. Whereas on the system at Marathon, if you lose one rooftop unit, you've lost heating, air conditioning, ventilation, the whole 9 yards. And if you lose one heat pump, you've lost one or two classrooms instead of a whole wing of a building. So that kind of some other pros and cons that come along with that.
How about hot water? Domestic hot water. Is that just hot water heaters here and there?
So it'll be a centralized hot, so we did look at that as well. At Buckley, there's a hot water heating system that has a central compressorized unit in a mechanical room with some storage tanks.
That would be-
So we store hot water to distribute throughout the school.
But it would be heated with electricity.
It would be connected to the ground source heat pump system.
Oh, it is
Yes,
connected.
yeah, so it's still the same efficiency you'd see out of a,
Right.
and we like those because it helps balance my well field load, so we like to get that connected to it as well.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that I was surprised by. They had two large storage tanks.
Yeah.
And and you first walk in and it's why is there so much space for hot water? But it's the recovery rate of the heat exchanger or the heat pump that heats the water
Yeah.
can't sustain the full building load, so it needs to preheat that water, but it operates so much more efficiently than say a gas or electric heating element would, and so you still get the energy savings, but you're able to satisfy the demand.
Yeah.
Right, in a gas-fired system, you wouldn't store that much water because you could just heat it up. You turn the gas on and heat it up quickly.
Yeah.
The electric way just doesn't work that same performance, so we store some amount of water. I'll say the system there is more than it's designed by different companies, probably more storage I would do than we would do on this particular project, but we'll get those numbers right.
Thank you.
Can I ask just out of curiosity?
Sure.
So each of these little closets for every two classrooms, you need a little closet in between it to store the heat pump. So how big are these? The heat
They're
pump
like
closets?
5 by 5, 5 by 6, so 30 square feet or so. And we try to gang them together. We get better economy of scale if I can get 2 in a room or 3 in a room, so we can share some clearances
do
and
that and
whatnot.
have them-
Yeah, so what
like
our
this
approach is, we're trying to create a spot within the wing that distributes and takes all the heat pumps for the wing would be in a room
Okay.
instead of
Like
scattered
two
everywhere.
classrooms,
Right.
yeah.
We've done it that way.
I think that's actually our next slide.
All right, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, well, there you go. Good segue. But this is not this school. This is another school that we did design with Perkins Eastman that shows that one heat pump per 2 classrooms. So you can see right here, that's the heat pump that's in the closet. The closet does access off the corridor so that if Tim has to go work on it, he doesn't have to get into the classroom environment to take care of it, which is another little bonus feature of it, which we like. So that's what that, and so then we have ductwork that distributes air to both classrooms, and we gang classrooms together that are common exposure and common occupancy. So we're not going to mix an office and a classroom. We're going to mix a second grade classroom with a second grade classroom. And they tend to go around in groups anyway, so that zoning works well. We do that to help reduce equipment, because it would be crazy to put one in for every heat, but just a lot. It's already a lot of equipment, so really we try to balance the amount of equipment we're buying that we have to maintain. So we'll zone that accordingly. So that's what that looks like. But this will be a little different in the fact that we're going to have maybe a larger room at the end of the wing that'll have maybe 4 or 5 heat pumps in it, and we'll have ductwork going down the corridor to feed the different classrooms. That'll all come out through our schematic design process that we're in the middle of.
What's the useful life of a unit?
It varies, but we tend to say 20 years. You know, it all comes down to maintenance and how you take care of it and how much you run it. You know, there's sometimes you get a lemon and a compressor will fail. If something does fail on these, it's generally the compressor. Standard warranty that comes with these systems was 1 year is included for everything, but the 2nd through 5th year is the compressor itself. So if there is a failure within that 2nd to 5th year of ownership, Tim will get a compressor sent to him. He has to install it. That's an industry standard warranty for any compressorized type of system. So it buys you a little bit more time. We can't do special and custom warranties because MSBA gets mad at us. So but we can stick to that one. It's pretty simple. Beyond that, there's really nothing else to break with it. It's a fan, some coils. So this is the maintenance consideration. So this is actually a picture from Buckley Elementary, and this is some of the topics that we discussed when we went and did the walkthrough a couple of weeks ago. We do make sure that every heat pump has a standard filter size, so it's all going to be 2 by 2 filters. So Tim only has to stock one size filter in a school of this size, which is great. We have to find a home for all those to be stored, but that's something we'll figure out. And again, those would be replaced on however often you want to replace filters, you do the same thing here. We have the flexibility to put MERV 13 filters in these units as well, which is, you know, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have never have said we'd do that in elementary school or any K-12 school for that matter. But with post-COVID design, we have that ability to do that, and it gives you flexibility to, we'll design them that way. And if for whatever reason you don't want to do that in the future, you have the flexibility to kind of go to more traditional filters. But it gives Tim flexibility to do whatever you want, and gives you, you know, in the future to be able to kind of operate the building how you want to operate it. Each unit has a drain pan and evaporator coil. Again, like any piece of air conditioning equipment, it has those things in it, and you would clean them and maintain them like you would any other piece of equipment. So nothing unique there, but each one does have a condensate drain pan. You can see that's this piping right here that we would dump down a drain. Each heat pump has a fan in it that blows the air back and forth. So the fan is behind this panel right here. It's connected to this duct. This duct is blowing air up, and it's sucking it back. And it's sucking it back this way. And so that fan sits in here and blows air that way. It's what we call direct drive fans. There's no belts on it that we have to worry about squeaking or breaking and repairing, which is helpful from a maintenance perspective. So there's no lubrication for it. Again, the motors can fail. Those motors can be replaced pretty easily. These are like 1/2 horsepower motors, so they're not very big motors, and they can be replaced pretty quickly. There are some controls. Again, every system has some level of controls to make things turn on and off, and set point control. So there are control valves at each one of these units. And this one's actually inside this cabinet, so you don't even see it here. When the unit's off, we shut the water off. When the unit's on, we open the water flow up. This is the ground source heat pump piping here that drops down, goes into the unit, comes out of the unit, goes back to the well field. So that's what you're seeing there with that. And there's a control valve that restricts that water flow. Again, it's important that we keep that closed loop pressurized, to keep it treated, and keep it air free. Again, like we would any other closed loop. We have seen on ground source systems that the ground loop does need to be, again, treated like any other loop would. We have seen some bacteria build up in ground source heat pump loops that just has to be treated, but that's all done out of the monitoring process to make sure that doesn't get out of control. Depending on, we haven't gotten to this level yet, but there is an ability to put some antifreeze in that loop. The loop itself stays, I think, as Chris mentioned earlier, the low end's usually in the 45-ish range. And so freezing is 32, but there is a low end of where that equipment can work. We don't have to necessarily put antifreeze in it, but as we continue to do the design, we'll make that decision as we get further along if we need to add that to it. Our goal is to try to avoid it because it's one less thing to take care of and maintain if we can avoid it, but it also provides a level of insurance as well. So there's a balance there we have to strike. So we have to get further into the engineering of it before we can determine if we need that. It really comes down to the sizing of the well field, and we'll talk more about that in a minute.
And that was also one of the things that we highlighted on the tour is they had a very specific process for starting up the loop to make sure that you don't introduce so much load into the loop that you haven't balanced with the well, so that you don't freeze the loop when you're turning it on or superheat the loop when you're turning it on. And Jess described a lot of the process that they followed. And we talked with the CM about his experience and what he would have done differently, and his experience was that it all went very smoothly. The only piece that he wished that they had tackled differently was the process for starting the drilling of the actual wells. The schedule assumptions there weren't what they thought they would be when they started, and so that was really his only takeaway of what didn't work well in this project.
We only have 60 wells at Buckley Elementary. This one we're tracking 170. So it's a scalable system, but it's 3 times the size of that one, right? So it's going to take 3 times as long to drill these. But generally on a well field this size, you'll have the contractor would have multiple rigs out to do that work. But again, that'll all come later. The warranty we talked about, we can't customize it. That's what that should say. We cannot customize it. The refrigeration circuit, again, we talked about just basic compressor, evaporator, condenser, and expansion valve and reversing valve. So I say a refrigerator with ductwork on it. It almost looks like a refrigerator. So, and then there's some pretty easy troubleshooting. If Tim got into a scenario where he had to do something, he's got a refrigeration technician. You can hook gauges up to it and easily tell what's going on with the system. So it's a pretty simple from that perspective. Any questions about this slide? Any other commentary from Tim or Chris?
I have a question on,
Sure.
on the performance. What's the effect if there's a leak in the system on the heating performance? Is it just a reduced performance?
Oh, in terms of a water leak?
Water leak.
We can't have water leaks, so we'd have to identify there's a water leak and get that fixed. At some point, it would stop functioning. Like the water would empty itself out, and the systems would all shut themselves down. So we put in. Chris mentioned earlier on where we fill water into the system. We have some controls on that to monitor flow. We never want to see flow in that, and if we do see the flow, that triggers an alarm that Tim can say, hey, we got to go do something. Something's gone wrong. So we never want to see that happening.
That's the part I was thinking about. What if there is a leak? It's going to be difficult to find it. So
Yeah, so the leaks, I guess anything could be an issue. The outdoor piping is all HDPE, high density polyethylene piping, so it's natural gas piping basically, and it's all fusion welded. So they get these giant heaters and they melt the piping joints together. And it's pressure tested, and we over pressure test it just to make sure of that very thing, because that's where the failures would occur. The loops itself, so the loops themselves, again, we'll have 170 things scattered on the site, and they're all 500 feet deep. That 500 foot is a single piece of pipe. It's on a coil, so there's no joints within that vertical piece. But at the bottom, there's what's called a U-bend, so we have to join these two things together so the water can get back up. There's a joint that's at the bottom, and then joints at the very top. And if there is a leak, we have the ability to, that might be my next slide. Yeah, so what we're showing here is there is individual circuits, so not each well isn't fed individually, they're in groups. So we would have, say, 17 circuits of 10 to get to 170. If there was a leak, we'd be able to tell from the pressures within the circuits of which circuit the leak was in, and we could isolate that circuit. Still, the building would still function. I'm not going to have to shut the whole building down because one circuit is off, and we'd have to go out and do some leak detection, which is not the easiest thing in the world to find water leaking in a pipe underground. But it's like, it's just like domestic water piping at this point. There's a way to go find that through sonar or.
Didn't you mention at Buckley you had a couple of strategies that you incorporated into the well field for leak detection and identifying where the wells are?
The leak detection is through that makeup water system, so you would see that internally through where the water's going in. So we would have some alarm that would tell us that water's moving into the system, again, which we don't want. So that would trigger alarm early. We do also, we do what's called tracer wiring, so there'll be some underground wiring so that you could hook some leads up to it and see where those pipes are. And then all the wells will be GPS located. I mean, civil engineering pretty much does that by any standard. So we'll know where those wells are, the caps of those wells are throughout the whole site to at least give us a little bit better chance of going to find these things.
You mentioned you could isolate that group of 10 and still run the system.
Correct.
Is there a point where there would be failure? I mean, half the system was down, then would it not work, or?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to really get into, how do we start shedding load so we can operate the building. So again, this might be even later, but I'll go ahead and talk about it now. For instance, on the day in February, it was minus 10 degrees outside. That's a pretty cold day that most systems will be taxed, whatever system type you have. There's ways to shed load. We could set back the fresh air system some. We could shut them off for a period of time to help not shock that system. I'd rather save my system than maybe not have fresh air one day. That's okay. So those are some strategies we would employ to do that. And so when we do all the startup, we're watching those temperatures because we want to make sure that it's kept in check. Because these systems always start up. They always finish construction at the end of summer. And so you really don't get a lot of time to get a lot of heat into the ground. So you're almost immediately putting this thing into a heating mode. So we really have to watch those temperatures closely, and that's where we can bypass water. There's other things we can do to keep those loop temperatures from dropping quickly. That's really what we have to monitor.
And when you use the word monitor, is this here locally, or is this monitored somewhere else as well?
So we like to have access to the systems to see them if we can get access through IT systems to do that. There will be digital controls within the building. We'll have temperature sensors that will go back to a central digital control system that Tim would ultimately be the owner of. A lot of owners will grant us access to see through those systems, and we can then monitor and trend that as well.
But the type of system we're talking about is a building management system that's very similar to what Tim currently uses within Hopkinton. Most buildings in Hopkinton Public Schools, it's similar to the building management system they have at Marathon. And so it'll be different components that the system monitors, but it will still generate alerts and alarms when there's issues that come up and be manipulatable. Where it was, one of the discussions we had was whether, when we were looking at different types of systems, another option we looked at was chilled beams, which the task force sort of moved away from. And one of the reasons was that operable windows create issues when you use chilled beams. But in this system, if you had a scenario where your DOAS unit that generates the fresh air on the roof was non-functional because of a mechanical breakdown, or if it's minus 20 and you don't want to introduce that outside air into the space, every room still has a window they can open to provide local ventilation. And every room still has the separate system that's providing the space temperature management, so that you can locally let air in even if you've taken the DOAS and the load that it would generate on the loop offline. You still can provide local ventilation and space temperature control.
But to answer your question, we actually were monitoring Buckley. When it got really cold outside, I had my engineer that designed it. It's like you're getting on every day and checking these trends to make sure, and if something's going on, we can be ahead of it and work with the owner or the operators down there to do something. So there's a lot of flexibility for that.
Thank you.
I got one.
Sure.
The town, for one reason or another, has become very sensitive to aquifer pollution. So if I live on the back of this school in the 500 plus wells and there's a leak, should I be concerned if I have a private well 400 feet away? Why?
No, I mean, it's just the water. It's mainly water that's in that loop. If there is an
I don't even be concerned about the antifreeze crap that you're having. You know, you talked about antifreeze. That gets circulated through the whole thing as well.
But if the antifreeze that's used is a Massachusetts allowed antifreeze that's suitable for that.
I only say this now to you because somebody's going to get up at town meeting and ask that very question.
I'll get
if they don't, I will.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
I want a good answer.
Yeah, I'll get you a good answer. So the MSBA, I'm not MSBA,
Okay, thank
the
you.
Mass.
Be prepared.
Yeah, MassDEP has a lot of requirements and regulations around this. We'll get you that one. Good question.
So, I'm new to facility stuff, so, how do you measure, like, how many wells you're gonna want for a system? And the reason I'm asking that is, all of our buildings right now are overcrowded, right?
Right.
So I assume that that generates more heat inside the building than you're expecting, right? So let's say this building somehow ended up overcrowded. Would we need to add wells? Would the system already have the capability to be flexible enough to handle that?
Table that question for
Okay.
about 2 slides.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on our agenda, believe it or not. Yeah. So what this slide was depicting here was that we were exploring different locations to put the well field. This is 3 different choices we're looking at, not where all of them would go. We're leaning towards option A at the moment of where it would go. Just FYI.
And so this is just really outlining scenarios that are plausible because we have other components that aren't related to the mechanical system that will also need to be addressed. Things like stormwater retainage and other site considerations that are going to factor in. So it's really demonstrating that there's really 3 scenarios that exist. It's probably a 4th that may be more or maybe less desirable to put it under the PE fields as well. But it gives you the general scope of what that 170 well field would look like.
Is there consideration given to what's above it? Because looking at these 3 diagrams, right? One of them's a parking lot.
Yep.
So is that
We put them under parking lots all the time.
Yeah.
The piping itself is 4 feet below the ground. And so we try to put it somewhere where we know you're not going to try to build something on it in the future is one of the considerations we make.
okay?
So one of the things that, with option A that I want more clarification on, they're gonna do that as part of their schematic, is where does all the rest of the subterranean stuff go? 'Cause
Yeah.
under the parking lot's usually where you put your recharge for your stormwater.
Right.
It's also potentially a place for photovoltaic canopies in the future. So to me, there's more competing needs in the front of the building versus the back of the building, but there is the addition that we need to create a buffer space for.
And any of these work mechanically. The PE zones is an option. It just becomes a cost factor. The further I put it away, the more it's going to cost to get piping out there. It'll work there too. In my mind, I don't guess I care really where it goes. But we do got to think about all these competing factors for this. So.
And to just take a step back, there's no exposed wellhead. Like if you have a residential well right now, you would have your well pump coming up wherever the wellhead is. You don't have that in this scenario. All of that is buried, and so it can easily go below an athletic field or a parking lot or something else, provided that you're not going to be digging into that ground.
Okay. And unlike a septic field, where you might have clean outs or things like that, these systems don't come with little wells to get into it. It's a fully buried system.
But wouldn't a parking lot be the least desirable if you did have an issue and you had to go search and find the leak? Compared to an open field and
Certainly it's more costly to troubleshoot the issue.
Patching it is not ideal.
What's the lifespan of the wells themselves?
The piping itself's got a 50-year warranty. So it just comes down to making sure we get the piping pressure tested appropriately and enough.
So in 50 years, the parking lot has to be ripped up and all the piping.
The piping will last longer than the parking lot.
Yeah, that parking lot will be done 2 or 3 times before we rip up the wells.
But that is a valid point. I mean, it does come down to if there is troubleshooting, then it becomes a little bit more problematic to deal with it. So we just have to we have to factor all of that into where it goes. Again, I'm agnostic to really where it goes personally. So we just got to find the right spot for the project.
Quality control management, now you'll have a geothermal engineer monitoring the install contractor to make sure that they're not, over-sagging the pipes or creating stress on them while it's getting installed.
As they do with anything out in the site, there, especially in the parking lot, there's a lot of backfill excavation, proof rolling, so you get the subsurface all correct. That's even more critical when you put that well field in there too, because I have seen, if that's not done right, you can have potholes on 20-foot centers if you're not careful, if it's not done right. And that's quality control of the installation. That's paramount.
How far apart are the wells?
They're 20 feet on center.
20 feet on center. So
In a grid
go down
pattern.
500 feet, go down 500 feet. How is that connection made 500 feet down between the wells?
They're not, so it's all
they're
connected.
not.
It's all connected in a
It's all at
trench.
the top.
Yeah, it's all connected in a trench that's 4 feet.
So each well is, picture your four fingers, each well is, they go down together, and at the bottom, they're fused And those 4 pipes all go down one well, and then they grout around that, and that's how the thermal conductivity occurs.
Great, thank you.
One more question. You mentioned they are 20 feet apart, but when you actually do the design and the modeling, you might need 25 feet. So have you planned for that in this early phase?
I've not had to do 25 feet in a school project before. I wouldn't anticipate that happening. What we would do is, so right now we've based that 170 based on our historical data from previous projects of what we think it's going to be, right? Because we don't know exactly how to size that yet. So a little bit to her question earlier was, how do you size that? One, we need to do a test well to understand the thermal conductivity to get that right size of that. And what we typically have done is, if there's some variation in cost that can come if I've underestimated the size of that well field, it could mean we need to buy more wells or come up with a different way to offset the capacity. And so what we deal with is, hopefully it's the other way around. Hopefully I'll put a little bit more in than we need at this point, so that we can go backwards. And what we do is typically make the wells a little shallower, instead of changing the spacing of them.
But that is a topic for further discussion as part of today's, to Lee's earlier question.
Right, so
we'll be talking about that
these are all
tonight.
questions that get addressed in the
teaser,
designs.
So a little bit about the occupancy question. So, it is important that we understand the schedule and occupancy of the building. So we have worked with Susan and Tim. We've got a pretty good handle now on filling in these blanks of how we think the school's going to be used. It is, and there's, we're not going to design this so down to the wire that we don't have some flexibility in terms of capacity of that well field. It will, it won't immediately, like if the school were to be overcrowded, it wouldn't like overheat the next day. It would take a longer period of time for that to happen. And there's a couple of different ways you can address that. One, you can add wells, or you can add, what we'll talk about in a minute is another way to address that, with air source technology. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But this is a graph from Buckley Elementary. We just wanted to show that in terms of how we're monitoring that data. This is actually at the front door as they walk in, so the students can go up and see it. And you can see on this top slide, this is the PV output. So this is the PV, what it's producing versus what it's consuming. And so we're, at this point in time, we're producing more than we're consuming in this building. And the way we do the net metering or the sub metering within the building, we have sub metering for the various systems within it. So this is all the mechanical system. So we know the mechanical system, as we say before, is the bulk of the energy is that mechanical system. That's why we put so much emphasis on getting the most efficient mechanical system we can, because that's where the energy goes. And the rest of it would be lighting and computers and other things like that. But it gives you a sense of where those ratios go. And then this down here is, this is actually representing the geothermal BTUs of heat going in and out of the ground, and you can see it's occupancy based, it's schedule based. It's, they're in the school, it's the weekend. They're in the school, it's the weekend, and so you can see these patterns over time. So it just gives you a visual representation of how these systems perform.
And one of the reasons that we brought this up is we've talked a lot about EUI, but one of the things that you have to take into consideration is the use pattern of the building. Because we're not talking about designing a building that when everything is on, it's the lowest possible energy. We're talking about a building that has the lowest possible energy for the schedule that you plan to operate it under.
Right.
And so a lot of that EUI discussion relates to designing the building around how you plan to occupy it. I mentioned the smaller pumps for the continuous operations versus the larger pumps for when the building's already occupied. And what Jess is really highlighting here is the fact that when that building's off, they have the ability to dial it back but still generate energy, because that energy that you've generated when you dial it back supplements the energy that you're using when you're at your peak. And so schedule comes into how you plan that. Summer operations, how much of the building will be actively occupied and needs to work, will go into how that system's designed. You may change the pump scheme based on one wing and common spaces being used during summer versus the entire building being used, because you can operate it more efficiently in that way with, say, 3 pumps instead of 2 or other considerations. And we just wanted to highlight that point for the committee because it's an important part of how the system design will move forward, regardless of which system the committee votes to choose.
So does that mean we will have to know while you're designing what programs, what use may be, or we'll have the flexibility would be built in to adjust to whatever the summer use may be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 8 years from now? Or is it locked in during the design phase?
It's not locked in. There'll be some flexibility in that. Now, if you came and told me you're going to operate this building every day of the year, all year, then that's different. But if we're going to have summer school, we know there's going to be summer school, then we can design those hours into the load. But if we went to like year-round school, that might bring a different set of conditions to think about.
So does this work kind of like a solar would kind of work, like the energy is stored somewhere to be used later on? I guess I
Yeah,
don't
so
understand.
the ground source is basically a thermal battery. So it's not solar, but we are
Right,
taking the
right.
heat of the building, putting it in the ground, and then taking it back out of the ground through that closed loop. So it is a thermal battery, basically.
And that's just in the ground? though?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm capturing a volume of earth and just chunking this thing into the ground, and that's what we're using to store heat.
Okay. So that kind of accounts for the peaks? Okay.
This, what you see here, is actually PV generation, so that's different. So that's actually taking the energy, the electricity that we are using and offsetting and putting it back on the grid.
Okay.
So they're two different systems there.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's why I was
Yeah,
confused. I
yeah.
wasn't, okay.
Yeah, they are
Thank you.
they're two different things
All
there,
right,
yeah.
thank you.
Mhm. Yeah. We got into a little nerdy discussion in our meeting about what the system really looks like, so I just wanted to throw that up there because we thought it was kind of funny. But anyway, we were talking about, the reason I put this up there because we were talking about how do we deal with the future. So with this system, the money is in the well field. We know if you go look at the breakdown, the wells right now, I think we're budgeted $35,000 a piece. Like $70 a foot, I think, is the number that we've carried in this estimate, which is a lot of money. So adding and subtracting wells is a big deal. 10%, 5%, whatever numbers, that's a lot of money that could sway this thing, which is problematic. We have to be careful about that. So we do want to design this building to accommodate future expansion because we know that every school you've opened, you need to immediately expand like within a couple of years, it seems like, right? So we want to be sensitive to that. So we talk through like, how do we want to do that for this building? So the building itself, the wings are designed for classroom expansion. So we're going to design the building so that the ductwork and the piping is sitting at the end, waiting for those additions to occur, right? So we can at least connect and move out. What we wouldn't plan to do is size that well field for that because that's where the money is. I mean, that would be it's already expensive to begin with. To turn around and add another, however many wells to do that, to go from 170 to say 200 or 230 or whatever the number is it just makes it even more unattainable. So we wouldn't consider doing that, at least in terms of the initial investment. I mean, I guess we could if we had more money, but the plan is not to do that right now. And so what we would do is you could add that in the future. If you did an expansion, we could always include provisions to add additional ground source wells, which will be consideration, or we look to potentially doing an air source heat pump to offset that in the future. So that's another way to add heating and cooling. So this is what I was drawing here was my ground source loop. So my well field was out here. I've got pumps that pump the water in and out into the individual heat pumps. So this represents all the heat pumps in the building. And so if this thing starts to run out of capacity, I can tack on an air source heat pump, which is effectively a chiller that can take heat away or add heat to that loop. And that would give me the ability it helps us in a couple of ways. One, it helps me expand in the future, but also helps me short term if we do have a budget issue or if thermal conductivity comes back and says that we can't, you really need 200 wells to make this work today, and we just say we can't afford 30 more wells, then we can go this route in a more economical way to do it. And it'll have an EUI impact, but it wouldn't be like a huge deal breaker in terms of what we're trying to do. So it gives us the ability to shift if we need to as the project develops and the budgets keep coming. So that gives us a little bit of flexibility.
And as
for
we
that.
talked about options for the system, it becomes the other option if you're looking to cut costs, or if you find that cost increases are such that the full well field you need is no longer attainable.
Right.
It becomes the offset that you can introduce with I think we picked a couple of milestones that we'll look at in a second, but that gives you metrics along the way where you can say, I want full, or I want to offset it by 90, or I want to offset it by 80. And that's one of the options for consideration tonight is it worth cutting costs, but also cutting efficiency as it relates to the systems that we're going to discuss from a cost standpoint.
And this just supplements the loop, so the components inside the building, none of that changes.
And we would design for this to be connected in the future, whether it happens now or later or whatever, just so that so the provisions are made for it to happen. It gives us kind of a backup just in case we need to get there for whatever conditions may arise through the process.
And hydronically, are they compatible? So there's one option is add heat sources to the addition itself, and that's
Correct.
an isolated pod. But under this
Correct.
scenario,
So you could do that. That is an option, a way to do it as well. So we could treat the additions isolated with separate systems, and that's another way to do it as well. So there's other ways.
But in this one, you're talking about adding it to the geothermal to supplement
Correct.
in stream
Right,
with the
to
water.
keep it all as one, instead of having, isolated systems whenever you do, and that happens a lot when you do an addition, you end up with this whole other system. So we could do that for this, or we could look to, we would try to plan a way to integrate that in so it's a single system within the building is what we would propose.
And I think from this committee's perspective, like our charge is to make sure that we've got the flexibility and ease of connecting in the event of expansion.
This
So
gives
I
you
wanna make sure we're not
flexibility
going-
to do really however
Yeah.
you want. Yeah.
Right. I think that's what we need to know.
It gives you, there's a lot of options of how we could treat those additions mechanically. We'll put the provisions in so that it's as simple as we can make it within the limitations of our project.
Great.
Yeah.
And we wanted to highlight that if Hopkinton may have added to a building in the past over time, so we wanted to highlight the adaptability of the system so that when the community's looking at this building and this well field, they don't think that the only option we have is to go back in 5 years and drill more wells.
Right.
No, it's absolutely.
Right, so it gives you a backup plan to do. It gives you you can make that decision in the future. Maybe by the time that happens, technology's changed and there'll be some other whiz-bang way to do it that we don't know about yet. So that'll all come. The other thing we talked about, again, going back to the expansion part, is we're designing this building right now for a total occupancy of about 1,400 occupants. So that's students, staff, faculty, all that kind of stuff. Knowing that we have the classroom additions, which would add another 400 people to the building. So that's a pretty significant increase, which again is why we would invest in the ground loop itself right now, because that's a lot of investment, but make provisions within the infrastructure so that we could, more easily add to that in the future. So those are the numbers we're looking at in terms of right now it's 14, but we're planning for 1,800 in terms of the numbers and the math we're looking at.
And just for relative scope of anybody watching this, because we keep talking about that 1195 number, 1,400 includes all the other people in the building beyond the students.
Yes,
So
correct.
I know everybody around this
Yeah,
table gets that,
teacher,
just in case anybody's watching on TV and they hear, what do you mean 1,400?
That's why I said occupants.
Faculty, exactly, faculty, staff, all of that. 1195 is the
Yes.
student
To
design
be clear,
count. We need a lot
1195.
more people to run this school.
Yes, so I rounded up with my engineering way, yes.
So if there are some air source heat pumps included, would that mean that it would require more solar to be able to offset
Yes.
the energy?
Yes, it would absolutely. That's one of my next slides too.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
So if we are able to cut the upfront costs with less wells but more air source, then the operational cost, I'm assuming, is higher as well?
Correct.
Okay.
That's on the next slide too.
Jess is stealing my thunder.
I'm sorry, it's all good. It's all good. We tried to think about what we might be asked, so I think we've
So
covered it.
just
Yeah.
before we transition to the
Yeah.
next slide, at Hopkinton's town meeting, the town voted to pass I believe it was the Sustainable Committee's net zero resolution, which among other things, and I'm sure you can speak to this better than I can, charged public boards with making decisions that would work towards the goals that were set by that resolution. And so what we asked CMTA to do as part of our mechanical focus group was to look at those options that we originally considered in terms of energy use, in terms of cost, so that we could have a discussion about the ones that we thought should come off the table and the ones that are under further consideration. So that's sort of the segue into our next topic.
I've covered all this already.
Yeah, I think we covered all.
We covered all that, yeah, indirectly. So this is a summary slide. This is similar to what you'd seen previously in December of the 4 different options. I got the B right that time on the second one. I fixed it there apparently, so good for me. So that shows you the different options. So I'll just go through each of these, row by row. Stop me if and when you have questions. So the energy use intensity is that top row. So for the ground source heat pump system, we're estimating at 25. For the electric VRF system is a 45. For for the hybrid option, which is ultimately the hybrid option is what I just described. So is that adding that air source piece to it either now or later gives me the ability to do that. And that's kind of splitting the difference. That puts me at a 31. And then the VAV is at a 55 is where we're carrying that one. So those are directly proportional to solar PV. So the lower the number, the lower the PV. They're completely proportional to each other. So they're linear with each other.
Quick question on that number.
Yes, sir.
Because did I misunderstand, and Tim, I think you can probably help clarify this. Marathon today is option 2. Did I understand that?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I thought we saw numbers at Marathon today is like 25 EUI.
It's not. Some of the data we had was presented did not include the full picture of the energy used for it. We've been working to try to get this information out of Eversource and can't get it. In terms of what that actually
Marathon
is.
has never hit 25.
I don't even think it was
It's never
designed
been that
for
low.
25.
I was gonna say, I think it was designed higher than that, yeah.
I thought it was in the high.
We were in the 30s or 40s, I think, is what we were
Well,
looking at.
maybe it was in the
Yeah.
30s, but the 55 seems like on the other end of it.
55 is average for a VAV school that we see in our data.
Okay. Thank you.
The 25 and 45 and 31 are based on performance out of projects that we've done. The 55 is off of CBET, what is just industry average off of Energy Star. That's where that comes from. But we couldn't get enough to figure out what the number really was, and I don't believe that it's 40. I've been designing systems for a long time, and I will fall out of my chair if it's that low, but I could be wrong. So the next line item is the first cost. That's the initial investment of the HVAC system only for those components. And we worked with a cost estimator to get to these numbers. I didn't pull these numbers out of the air. These came from cost estimators. So the ground source system, again, is the most expensive at $17.7 million. The VRF is at 12.9. The hybrid is 15.3, and the VAV is at 12.4. Again, came from the cost estimators.
And for contextual purposes, the first cost is the number is the number that's going in the appropriation we go to town meeting for.
Correct.
So all of the things below it, incentives, all of these pieces come in after that.
Right. This is what's carried in the estimate.
Exactly. So
right
this
now.
is when we go to town meeting in November. It's that whatever option we choose. It's that line that goes into that total building cost.
Right.
So in 1C, for instance, a couple questions.
Sure.
Is there a breakdown of first cost? I mean, you see 17 million for option 1A. Just doing rough math, 35,170 wells is 6 million. So about a third of that is just drilling the wells.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else would be? Is it all the heat pumps and all the things? So all that other.
It's the heat pumps, it's the controls, it's the piping. There's a lot of sheet metal involved in this
Okay.
design, ductwork, insulation, all the other pieces and parts to put it all together.
So the step down from that would be option 1C, the 7525.
And it's the same system. We have just shed money out of the well field and bought this air source unit instead.
So is there looked at a 60-40, a 50 or 50-50, get to the point where now you're not creating.
We did. We looked at a lot of splits in there, and the reason we carried the 75 is because that gives us flexibility potentially. If we can receive IRA, Inflation Reduction Act incentives, once I get below that 75, that goes away because that law requires a certain ratio. And so, yes, we can do that if we want to do it, but then if that's an option, that's totally off the table in the future. It may be off the table anyway, we don't know yet in terms of how that money would come back to the town yet, but it would totally be, I know it would be off the table if we went below that number.
Thank you.
So we did look at, Chris and I looked at, I think a 60-40 and maybe a 90-10 or something like that, but
As part of the mechanical group, we looked at the varying options to find where the right split is. The known incentives, so the town's entered into the Mass Save program as part of this project. Mass Save has a couple of different tiers. The top tier and the best incentives comes with achieving a 25 EUI. So when you drop below that 25 EUI, your incentives also drop off, and that's one of the things that we'll also be talking about later today.
or right now. So that's the next line item on the chart is the Mass Save numbers there. So you can see that, the Mass Save and Eversource and Ingrid there's a lot of money being thrown at heat pumps, heat pump technology, whether it's air source or ground source or whatever. And so you can see what those numbers are, and there's an adder for it to do this 25 or less EUI. That's why you're seeing a $2.1 million, that negative as a credit that would come back to you. Once it's, you have to get the thing up in operation, they have to come out and validate things, then you get all that money in the end. We carry that at the third year in terms of the life cycle analysis and when that money would come back. Electric VRF, again, there's some, $500,000 is nothing to get mad about. It's still a good number. It's just a lot different than 2.1 million. So if you were to invest in electric VRF technology, even the additions could consider something like that in the future. There's still some good money to come back with investing in that technology. And then the hybrid, again, the hybrid is splitting. You see maybe a larger jump in the incentives from 1A to 1C because that 25 is a break point where you lose that tiered level that we talked about before. And then Eversource isn't going to help you if you go traditional systems, Mass Save isn't. It's just harder to get there. There may be a little bit, but it's incidental. And so then the next line item we carried, again, the Inflation Reduction Act incentive. So again, the federal government has put a lot of emphasis on clean energy technologies and a way to help invest in clean energy future. So that number there is you can get a 40% credit of the mechanical cost back. So that 7.1 is 40% of 17.7. That's basic math is what that number is. So again, how we get that, when we get it, can we get it, those are all still questions on the table. So I've just put that's more of an informational only line item. We haven't included that in any of the life cycle numbers. It's more just hey, let's don't forget about this because it's something that could be a real number later, but I didn't want to skew the conversation with that yet, since it's not completely known.
And the unknown, correct me, is that the relative newness of the Inflation Reduction Act programs. It's unclear as to how that's going to apply to municipalities, right?
No, public entities can go after that money. That's not the issue. The issue is will MSBA let that money come back to you through them?
Oh, so it's an MSBA question.
That's what we don't know yet.
It's also new enough.
There's not a proven track record. That legislation
program.
passed in the fall and has not been.
We have projects that are lined up this summer to go through that process. So we'll have that happen. It'll happen.
So we'll have the experience on that to know going in. Okay.
Yes. Again, we're not making any decisions based on this.
Yeah.
We're just providing the information. We are making the 1C was made on that decision because we just didn't want to lose track of that, right?
Okay.
And an important note about both of those incentives, they're after the fact verified incentives. So when you go to town meeting vote, you're going to go to town meeting vote with the first cost.
Right.
You may at that time have a better understanding of when those incentives will come back to the town, but you're voting to spend the first cost on the understanding that you're entering into a program where you'll get rebates back at the end to offset some of those costs.
Right, but as I said earlier, these are after the fact.
Correct.
So we are not taking these out of the appropriation.
This is bonus money later.
We're going to have to tell people, as with similar to the MSBA reimbursement, you're appropriating this, but the actual cost is going to be something less than this because of all these reimbursements that come in after the fact, making it even easier for us to tell this story to the public, which we appreciate.
Question, because I wasn't around for Marathon. When you get those rebates or when you get that money back, does it then go to paying off the loans from the town side? So does the town grab it and then use it to pay off to lower the payments on the...
It goes back to the town,
the
general fund, and so that would go into free cash, which would then be used to offset things in the future. So, wait, you don't want to get it's not, and because it's not like they're going to borrow this amount of money. Like, you can't even kind of extricate the different bonds they take to say how much is Marathon, how much is this, how much. They just borrow in tranches. So it just goes back to the town general fund and offsets other costs in the future.
Or use it to reinvest in something else. You could buy a PV with it, or you can do whatever you want, whatever the town chooses to do with that money when it comes back.
Right.
Okay.
Can't buy books with it.
Who uses that? Okay, and so then the next line item, again, just for comparison's sake, is I'd say first cost with an asterisk. We've captured the Mass Save rebates with that, so it's not technically the first cost, but it gives you a more normalized view of when you do factor the incentives. of what the numbers start to look like. So it pulls the GO down, and it pulls the VRF down, and then the hybrid option down. So again, you still have to invest the full amount. That money comes back. But that's 3 years down, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Again, that's mass save only, not IRA. And then we did the life cycle analysis. Again, a 30-year look ahead, and we did include the mass save incentives in those pieces. So the ground source has the 39.9 30-year cost, the VRF at 51.7, the hybrid at 42.8. I left out the mill on that one, and then the VAV at 45 million. And those account for the cost to buy the system on day one. So so we'll just pick on option 1A. That's the 17.7 to buy the system. At year 3, the life cycle's credited 2.1 million to reduce that cost. But then every year we factor in the energy cost, operating costs, and then there's a replacement cost factor that comes in later down the road, which is my next slide.
I have a question.
Sure, go back.
Just before we go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So as part of the mechanical focus group, we discussed option 1B and option 2 as well. We moved away from option 2 because it has the very large EUI. It would necessitate bringing a gas line into the building and generating additional emissions, which seems counter to the vote that the town just took with the net zero initiative. We also looked at option 1B, and the sizable shift in the EUI, as well as the sizable shift in the potential rebates that are out there, makes it harder to consider that option. That even though it's at a lower initial cost, when you look at this as a building that the town will have for 50 years, you're really looking at spending a lot more over that period of time to go with that system.
Yeah. My question was about which of these options would see the largest future cost escalation? Is it geothermal?
Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about that for a second here. So again, just as another recap, we get in a little bit more of the details here to show, again, the first cost investment is listed at the top. We do now list what the annual operating cost would be between those two options. So you can see that's energy and maintenance. So the energy cost is a portion of it, just to keep this graph as a little simpler to show that delta. We are carrying in the life cycle analysis a replacement cost factor at year 20 to say that at year 20, some portion of the system will need to be replaced. So that at year 20, what that would mean is, and these are conservative numbers, I would say, because we've discussed this internally, like what does this number really mean? The well field itself is 50 years. Like you're not going to have to replace that for a long time. But there will be heat pumps that have to be replaced, controls that will be out of date that have to be replaced, and other components within that system. So that 5.5 that you see there carries that amount of equipment and replacement, and that's a number in 20 years from now. It's not today's 5.5, that's 5.5 20 years from now number. So that's how we've carried those. So escalation is built into all of those numbers. When I look at my life cycle analysis, my 320, that's day one 320, but then it escalates a percentage every year throughout the life of it, just as everything escalates.
My question was a little bit, maybe I should clarify.
Sure.
It was more shorter term. Like I was thinking more net capital costs or installation costs. Because just in the past few months, maybe the well costs have gone from $30,000 per well to $35 now.
Right.
What will it be in 3 years? Maybe the well costs have gone much higher, whereas the other options are more or less the same number as what we are seeing.
I think I don't know if I can predict what's escalating faster than others. If that is, I mean, we have seen pretty significant escalation in well pricing recently, which is why we are carrying a higher number for it. But that estimate also includes, and you may know this, or we've got overall escalation within that total estimate has some of that as well. It's outside of my comfort zone to talk about.
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of factors involved in that too. One is that, Jesse talked about back in December, there's not a lot of people out there that do this right now in terms of the installation and a limited number of contractors, but it's a growing market segment. And as more towns make the votes that your town did, you're gonna have a lot more competition, so that may bring the overall dollar value down. But materials could continue to increase, so that gas rated pipe that he's talked about, may go up. So it's hard to predict exactly where the ebb and flow, kind of lands in 2.5 years when we would be bidding this project.
And how many, like schools, I guess to start, have had option one for more than 20 years?
I mean, the first one I designed was in 1999,
Okay.
so.
Well, that's kind of my point, is that we're making some assumptions on replacement costs when we don't really have real data to look at. So
Right.
virtually everything here is a projection.
Right, so we take a percentage of that total cost is what we've done to come up with that 5.5, knowing that the well field itself will be good.
But more on
that
the
period of time.
equipment side is where I was
Yeah.
going, is that
Right.
it could be 7-year replacement, or it could be 12, it could be.
I mean, I've had a lot in place. I mean, there'll be some onesie twosies that do occur that have to be replaced, but that, there's not a whole scale like something's just gone wrong. We have to replace the whole system in 7 years. I've not seen it. I have a lot of these installed for many years. Nothing maybe 20 years out, but many years where I haven't seen that happen.
And Bill, I think it's essentially pumps and stuff like that, so those things we can predict what the costs are because it's essentially the same pumps that are in everything that we're using today, just applied differently for this. So I think we can pull some costs based on those and life cycles as well. I think that's probably where some of that number came from.
That makes sense. And in option 1C, could we still do what you mentioned earlier for expansion? Could you put another
Yep.
air pump?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
So-
So that's going to give me that gives me flexibility. So it gives me flexibility right now if
Yeah.
we have some crazy thing happen in the bid market between now and 2 years from now. It gives me the team the ability to shift. If the bids come in great and we can afford it 100% geo, then we would go that route. And in the future, I could still go that way.
Okay.
It could be that if the other way goes and we don't have enough money to do 100%, we would do the air source option now and then work in a future way to do that as well in the future, whether again we add another one of those or we consider some other system type.
It also gives the committee the opportunity, if they chose to vote this way, to take $2.5 million out of the construction number and pursue a less efficient long-term building.
Correct.
The other considerations there below, again, these aren't factored into the numbers above the line, but just as more to give you a frame of reference, just so we didn't lose sight of that. But again, if there is a desire for this building to be zero energy and we want to buy all that PV to offset that, you can see the cost for the option 1 at 2.8 million to buy all the PV we need to offset that, and option 1C at 3.5 million. We have done some initial calculations, and the roof area right now can support an offset of about an EUI of 22, which leaves me 3 that we would need to deal with. If we didn't want to put on the roof, I'd need 3 EUI that I would deal with solar canopies or whatever. Now, if I go to a 31, that means I've got to buy another, whatever that math is, 7 or 8 EUI of PV to offset that number to get to that, so I have the total supply and demand matched up. Again, that's not in the cost of the project. There's not PV in the project. It's PV ready. We'll have all the infrastructure in place so you can connect to it. You can go a PPA route like you've done at our schools, however you want to procure that. It's still a cost factor. It's not going to ever be free. You're going to pay for it one way or the other, whether it's through your PPA lease or buy it yourself. We have seen some owners, at least in terms of the IRA discussions, is maybe I can take that IRA money and then buy PV with it in the next round. So it's something else to think about. Again, the IRA is just captured here again. That's the numbers we presented on the previous slide, just for comparison.
And in the context of the recent net zero vote in the town, what is the largest building that the town's currently looking at building would have a lower level that needed to be offset in terms of meeting those long-term goals?
Would options A, B, and C all qualify for the specialized energy code?
They'd have to. I don't know. I just have. That's all new as well, so we're still vetting through all of that. But yeah, we have anything we do is going to. I know option 1 would exceed code compliancy, but we have to make sure everything we do is match all those codes. Yeah.
What other questions do we have? Because I think that's your last slide.
That was my last slide before Bob comes back to the table.
Yeah, I read the packet ahead of time.
What's that?
I said I read the packet ahead of time.
You read the agenda a few minutes ago? I get happy to answer questions. I will follow up on the aquifer thing, for sure. And any other questions you guys might have, I'm happy to answer.
Is there any limitations, time limitations on the mass save? They change them from,
They've all just recently have changed to get to the numbers you saw. They really invested in the past year on heat pump technology. I mean, it all just kind of retransformed. So it's here for a little while. And I think what we do as a team is once we sign the MOU, we're in. Which we did already.
yeah.
So we're in.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
If better stuff comes out tomorrow, we're in this program, but this is better than what came the prior 2 years.
So
before
then
this.
once we formulate exactly what we're doing, we'll be able to fine tune that. We had our initial meetings with them and talked through all of that. So that's committed.
And the program that we entered is based on a per square foot, I think it's a per square foot reimbursement and an additional funding contribution based on the tonnage of heat pumps that are installed.
They do what's called a heat pump adder. So they give you certain dollars per ton based on the systems you're putting in. So they're heavily investing in same thing. They're just like the IRA, a lot more money coming back from the for ground source technology.
The Mass Save program that we entered into is what they call option 1, which is based on the fact that we will pursue a 25 EUI. If we find that we cannot pursue a 25 EUI, then the incentives step down as a result of the inability of the town to elect to go to that level.
But that's captured up here.
And that's
Correct. That's
up.
captured in the numbers, yes. Yeah, that's why you see that drop.
Right.
Because we lose that kind of that tack on, add-on incentive for that low EUI piece.
Jeff, Nicole, anything else question-wise?
I think you did a great job answering all the questions I was thinking of.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
I will say, I think if you went with option 2, our committee would probably fight you. Option 1A and 1C look great. $6 million. Yeah. I know that the town is very sensitive to costs. And it was very clear at town meeting that it's going to be quite a discussion on the costs. I like the idea of waiting to do the PV until the incentives come in a few years later. That makes sense to me. As long as everything is electrified, the costs can be, the emissions can be offset eventually.
Correct. The grid will clean itself over time. The PV becomes a cost management strategy because, electric buildings it costs more to heat and cool a building off electricity than it does gas, and that's still a very real thing and will be for quite some time. But now you have the emissions side of it that becomes the other factor that no one cared about till recently. Those are the carbon costs and those types of things that just something else you got to think about.
Yeah, and FYI that we are likely pursuing the specialized energy code for the same fall town.
Oh, nice. Are we grandfathered in or not? I'm joking. I'm joking.
We're not the specialized yet.
Yeah.
Another more question of 1C. Is it just simple math? If we're going to be 75-25, then we would only need roughly 75% of the 170 wells? Is it that simple?
It's not that simple.
Okay.
It's more, and we will have to get into the actual modeling to figure out. I haven't quite been that aggressive on the scale of it, so I didn't cut that much out of it from the cost factor. So I didn't go 75%.
So then then help me understand the 15.3 million.
So I took I came up with, instead of saying we had 170, whatever 75% of that is, 130 something, I said, let's say 145. I just picked a number a little bit higher just to give myself some safety factor because I didn't want to oversell the savings for it and then be wrong. You know what I mean? I didn't want to give back too much well field yet, not knowing exactly, because we haven't done any engineering yet on terms of sizing that system. So we actually have to get into doing modeling to size that the right way.
Do you have any experience where you've had this situation we're in now with other communities? You have gone to option 1C, and was it roughly 75% less wells, or did not?
No, this is all new. These are new concepts because of the Inflation Reduction Act and all these technologies you're seeing. Yes, this is all new.
Doing the hybrids?
Doing that hybrid.
Okay.
The equipment's, there's nothing really super sophisticated about the equipment, but coupling these things together is new. Yep.
So I guess my point is the savings could be even better than, the cost could be less than 15.3.
Yeah.
If you assumed a little bit higher.
Yes.
And I understand the reasoning behind
Correct.
it. Okay.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
The one thing is the air source heat pumps are expensive. A piece of equipment is expensive, so what the recent project bid out, and I'm trying to find out what the well cost came in at, but the air source heat pumps pushed that cost above the ground source, full ground source, just because of the cost of that piece of equipment. It's without the wells, though. Once you add the wells back in, it's probably a closer number.
Yeah.
I think you pull into a maintenance factor with that too.
It's an extra piece of equipment.
Yeah, extra piece of equipment.
And
Lot of
we've factored that in, and it's, you know, from an equipment perspective, it's like an air-cooled chiller. So from Tim's perspective, it's like a piece of machinery you have already in the district somewhere, probably at Marathon, I suppose, right? So, so it's not new technology. It's just we're packaging the systems together differently to accommodate that.
So can you, I know you said this earlier, but could you just clarify again, with the IRA money, we'll have a better idea in a couple months what that would look like? Because doing the math here, if that comes through, then ultimately 1A is the cheapest option.
That's correct.
But
That's
that
correct.
being a wild card, like
Right.
that's, I mean, upfront you still have the bigger cost.
You still have to
but
invest in it,
if that
yes.
IRA money comes in,
Right.
even as soon as you get those rebates, you now have chosen the cheapest
Yes.
of all.
That's a true statement, yeah.
Yes.
But there's a lot of moving targets to get to that, to where we can say yes to that. One is, you know, we're gonna go through some other projects we have, as my company has, that will go through this process beginning this summer. So this will all occur through the next tax cycles when it would start happening. So all these numbers will start coming through. We're working with tax attorneys and all kinds of people that are way over my head to figure out what these numbers really need to be. And then the other piece that we have to really understand is, you know, again, how does MSBA let this money come back and forth through? We don't know that. We haven't really. I guess we tried to reach out to them and haven't. And they know about it. We've talked about it, but we haven't really gotten.
Their senior leadership was discussing it, but.
Yeah. So we're trying to kind of get ahead of that to understand where their head's at with it. We know that, you know, Mass Save, they've generally been favorable to let that money come back, so you can have that money back. But so that's why I didn't want to, you know, we just want to show you for information because we're not really certain, but, you know, it has the potential to be a windfall. But there's a lot of variables in that still, so.
So just to inform the discussion, taking a little bit out of order, there are a couple of additional tasks that we'd be looking to evaluate from a budget perspective and potentially take on. Two of those tasks, the first one would be a geothermal test well, which currently is outside of the remaining funds that we have in the feasibility study. What that geothermal test well does is it, first of all, serves as the first well of the project. So assuming a successful funding vote, it would be your first well. So you'd have to locate it in the location you plan to put your well field. You would also be able to do what's called a conductivity test on that well, which will inform the sizing of the well field. If that conductivity test is advantageous when you complete it, you could be looking at a significant reduction in your well field because of, given it's the old adage of $1 a square foot doesn't sound like too much, but we have 176,000 square foot building. So if you can take 10% out of that well field, that adds up to I think it's $850,000. If you can take more, you can take more. The well field sized on historical data, not an evaluation by a geothermal engineer. So that test is really the step that you'd have to take to really dial in that well field size. $50,000, give or take. I don't have the exact number right. It's $53,000 to perform that test, but you're getting your first well and you're potentially dialing in what your construction cost is for that well field, which could be significant in terms of what you move forward with in construction.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Question specifically on that, so, which I probably should have asked you before, but so, if we understand that if we drill that test well and do that connectivity test, it gives us a better insight into the design of the well field at an earlier stage. If we don't do that, are we digging 170 wells, or will we do that further down the road?
You need to do it. We'll do it. Yeah.
So like that, if we only need, I'm making up numbers, 130 wells, we will still find that out. It'll just be after we go to the town for the money that we need. This allows us to get a more refined estimate of the wells that we'll need before we go to town meeting.
Take some question marks out of what we're
Right,
presenting
okay.
to you.
I just wanted to make sure, like, are we,
Yes.
if we're talking about timing, or if we're talking about potentially costing more money, the well field's gonna be sized right regardless, it's just when we're gonna know what the right size
Which
is.
is why we carry option C. If, depending on when that decision gets made, it gives us the flexibility to react.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And how long does the test take and results and all of that?
I mean, it doesn't, we gotta get somebody on board, but they can do the drill in a day. The drilling can get done in a day, then they have to do the testing, would take a couple of days. So we usually see by the time they're out on site, we'll have a report in our hands in about 2 weeks.
Everyone's extremely busy.
But you gotta get them out here.
Yeah,
You gotta get them out here is the hard part, right?
The 53,350 is based on a proposal that we have from Perkins now.
And that includes the driller test well plus the geothermal engineer to monitor it, write the report, and give an analysis. So,
Give us the numbers.
there's an engineering in there, so it's more than just the pure drill cost.
So did I understand correctly that you said that it was above the leftover feasibility money?
Yes, so, let me,
Yeah, it's beyond what we have left.
it would be easier to put this on the screen for all of you. Switch with Dan for a second. I'll stand up.
So essentially, we had a certain amount of money left over. We've authorized recently the survey work, the wetlands work, and the traffic study, right? And so we've got some money left over, and there's the wish list outweighs the funds. And so there are things that we can choose to do, and two of the topics tonight are that this is one of them, and then we've also got a proposal back as of today from Mass Save about the peer review and the energy modeling program that they have available.
So, after discussion with the district, they've contributed to the portion of the traffic study that affects the other schools. So that is from the authorization that the school committee made for the system-wide study. It's $23,600, which is factored into what I have in front of you here. We also looked, as Jeff mentioned, at the Mass Save Technical Advisor. So as part of the option one that we went into, Mass Save will contribute $10,000 towards the technical advisor. The technical advisor has two sort of scopes of work that you choose from. Task one for the technical advisor is the required scope of work, where they review the documents, verify that you're on the right path. They do that at multiple stages throughout the process. So they provided us with a proposal for that, which was included in your meeting packet from Thornton Tomasetti. So what you see here for the recommended tasks is task one, which was $4,000 for the town share, and task, I don't know, is it task 4?
2E.
Or 2E, or, which is plug load analysis, where they'll look at the plug loads within the project, which is something that isn't currently within Perkins' scope, and they'll use that to help develop the EY based on the analysis that they provide on those plug loads. Together, those two would be about $7,000, so that's the recommended tasks that are issued here. The $13,000 is for two additional tasks that the committee could select. The first task would be essentially a peer review, where they would look at the loads and work with CMTA to verify that the loads that they're using are appropriate. That serves as sort of a peer review fact check on what CMTA is proposing. So it has value in the sense that you're putting a second set of eyes on it, but it is purely an optional task. The other component of that, the $3,000, would be a peer review of their life cycle analysis. So they would look at the same assumptions that they had made about the system versus their own technical experience, and advise you on whether or not they feel that they've provided you a good life cycle analysis. It's a check on their work that the town could elect to do to sort of feel better about what's being presented in terms of the system you're pursuing. One's a system analysis peer review, the other is life cycle cost peer review. Both of those are optional tasks. The other task that's shown here is the test pits. So the test pit is something that we would recommend that you move forward with, and this relates to stormwater infiltration. We're currently talking with a contractor that Tim had provided to us who does a lot of work in town to refine this number. It's right now a construction budget number, but what that essentially is you dig a test pit and you test the stormwater infiltration of the soil on site so that you get a sense of what will be necessary to size a stormwater system. Given the amount of groundwater that we've seen on the site and the wetlands in the area, we think that makes sense so that we can give confidence to the neighbors should the project move forward, that we can adequately deal with the stormwater. So we're trying to refine that number, and we hope to bring something more concrete to you by the next ESBC committee. When you look at this together, it's $72,200 to select all three of those options for the $50,716 that remains within the project. We could elect to only do the stormwater and find additional funding for the geothermal test well to better dial in the overall project cost that goes to town meeting, because we would understand the viability of proceeding with the geothermal system at a higher level.
So, a couple, I think, before we discuss this, because you're looking for direction from the committee tonight,
So,
correct?
ideally, the committee would provide direction on the mechanical system that they would like to move forward on, and provide direction on the options that they would like to select for Thornton Tomasetti as the technical advisor. Those options would be just the base scope of services for $4,000, the base scope of services and the plug loads for $7,000, or the entire package, which would be $20,000.
Okay, but hang on. So, those are two
distinct,
related but really distinct decisions based on two different sets of data we were presented. So let's break this apart for a second. So the first thing is we're
gonna sit down.
So yeah, so the HVAC and mechanical systems is the sooner we can make a decision as a committee about which option we would like to pursue. Obviously, that puts us in a more advantageous position. I don't know if I'm the only one who's realized that when we talk about a special town meeting in November, that's 6 months away, so that's not a lot of time. So the sooner that our professionals can get started on that, the more advantageous position we'll be in. The earlier we'll get information that we can then start communicating to the town about what this is all going to look like. Now, in a discussion that we had late last week, we talked about the timing on this because we recognize that the committee's been hit with a lot of information tonight. So, if we feel like the committee has a sense of what option we would like to pursue, we can make that decision direction tonight. My understanding, and feel free to correct me if I misheard you, is that if this bleeds into our next meeting, that's not terrible in 2 weeks. But really, by the 23rd would be the end date that it would be reasonable to not create some problems. So what I would say is, if the committee feels like there is a direction tonight, then let's go with that. If there are things that you feel like you need to know that you don't know right now that we could reasonably get before the next meeting that would significantly inform the decision, then let's talk about those as well, and then we can talk about if that makes more sense. So that's the HVAC and mechanical system. So actually, what I'm going to suggest is let's deal with that right now, and then let's get into the optional service menu after we figure that out. So what I'm opening up for discussion is whether or not the committee feels like we are in a position to make a direction about which one of these options we think we would like to pursue. Before I open it up for discussion, give me some sense of, are there things we might, if we give you, let's say we went with an option tonight, and there are things that we find out as you get deeper into the design, what's the ability to make changes? You do the connectivity test if it's 250 wells.
Yeah, the which we wouldn't do, right?
Right.
So the building itself is the same. So we're still designing, the heat pumps are the same, the fresh air is the same, all that's the same. It just comes down to really that central plant piece, or whether I'm designing 170 wells on its own, or 170 wells an air source heat pump, or 150 wells an air source heat pump. So from my perspective, it's not a huge ordeal. That gives us, the reason we're presenting that as an alternative, it gives us flexibility to be able to react.
Okay.
And without throwing everything out the window and starting over. That gives us as a team that flexibility.
And I just want to supplement that with, and that assumes that you're accepting what the mechanical focus group discussed, which was that we're pursuing a heat pump-based solution. So we will have either option 1A or option 1C. We won't be returning to VRF or to the conventional marathon type system.
Can you hop back up a slide? So maybe in terms of, I don't want to overly direct the conversation, but to focus it, let's start with that piece. So we've got, of these 4 options, is there, the mechanical systems subgroup, it recommended that we choose between options 1A and 1C, which are both heat pump based systems. Is there any feeling that we want to keep option 1B or option 2 in frame? Okay, then you can go back to the other slide, because this one is too much information now.
That's why we put this slide together.
Okay, so in terms of deciding between whether we want to pursue option 1 versus option 1C, this is where I'll open up to the committee for discussion, thoughts, remaining questions. What are your feelings?
It sounds as though if we do have the option to go, so say we go with option 1, which is the greenest option, and potentially, ultimately, the cheapest option, but still maybe not the cheapest option. But we find out after the tests that it's no longer viable, we can go backwards and go to 1C. If we start with 1C, we still have the option to go to 1A, but it seems like we should maybe shoot for the stars, and if we can't do it, then we have a good backup, a viable backup.
That's exactly my mental model on this too. I feel like 1A has the likelihood to cost the least. The IRA incentives over time definitely lower that number. It's the greenest option, and we have that added flexibility that they were talking about in the previous slides of growth into an air-based heat pump should we need it.
And that option's always on the table, based on what you said,
Yeah.
I personally think the first option is probably the best option for the long term. But I'd really be interested to see what these 2 folks say down here and how they're going to support us at town meeting should we go that way.
Well, we can't officially.
What is your best option?
Personally, A, or 1.
It's
One, we'll try and be consistent.
Yeah, okay, that's my fault.
Because you're the town experts. These guys are all hired.
I did a terrible job.
We get you for free. You're the ones they're going to listen to at town meeting. So we need your support if we go this way, because obviously there's a dollar value.
No, I think that statement was right on. Like, has the potential all around
Yeah,
to be
if it's
best,
the outlet.
but still has the flexibility if we get more
There's an outlet
information.
there, back there.
Oops.
It's greenest, it's cheapest, and it's simplest system.
Bill, I'm just going around the
I'll
table.
be the dissenting.
Okay.
Well, actually, I may not be. I have a question first, because last meeting, I ended with, now that we're getting into the cost, and again, I'm from the appropriation side, so it's money is what I'm representing here from the appropriations. It looks to be, no matter which system we go with, 1A, 1C, it's between 8 and 10% of the total cost of this project. Okay. So I have to assume this is one of the bigger pieces of the total project. What I asked last time, and maybe I didn't do it very well, is if we needed to cut $10 million from this project, where would we do that? Would this be one of the areas where we got to start chipping away at this $170 million upfront cost? So I'll ask that question first, and if not, where in future discussions can we find $2 million, $3 million, $1.5 million, so we can find a way to knock this cost down to some degree? Because I'll tell you, at the town meeting, you know, and I talked earlier, we've been running with models that show some of the other projects coming up are even more expensive now than we thought a month ago, or at least we had numbers for. So the money keeps going higher and higher and higher, and I think we've got to at least try to find some ways to chip away at it. And I'm wondering, is this one of the areas that you typically see communities try to find that balance? So I'll start there.
So, yes, the HVAC system would be one area where it's a big cost driver on the project. You see the numbers on the screen of $17 million is 10%, more than 10% of the overall cost of a building, right? So that's a big number. The decisions that the town makes, including the decision that was just made to pass that, is forcing the town into a certain direction. And this is consistent with many towns in Massachusetts, where it's challenging to look back at every town's previous project. In your town, everybody anchors it to Marathon. The decisions that have occurred locally and at the state level over the last few years are driving the cost of all building construction up. Because when you get to these low EUI buildings, you're not only changing the way you design systems to be more expensive systems, you're having a more expensive envelope. So you're having thicker walls with more insulation, which then make, believe it or not, more wall, right? Because every time you hit a corner, that wall is now deeper. So you have one extra row of brick every time you have a corner, just in a simple term. Same thing with your roof. You have more insulation on your roof. Now it's taller, you need more wood blocking and metal facade to get up there. So these decisions about being low EUI and net zero and sustainability have repercussions. And so that is an education that needs to happen. And I'm not chasing your question, but that's an important thing that you just start with the community, is to, these are decisions that we as a group made, and these are the realities of where you're at now because of that. So if you want to get the overall numbers down, yes, the design of the building in terms of the HVAC system is one element, as is the facade materials, right? You can pick traditional brick, you could pick block, you could pick other rain screen type technologies out there. So there's lots of decisions in terms of the finishes of the building that make that decision. The size and shape of the building makes that, but you're always balancing, right? With a school, you want daylight. You don't want to have the Pentagon, right, with no windows, like, a fortress, right? It's got to meet all these competing needs. So HVAC is one area you can look to reduce costs, but once the train has left the station, then being sustainability, you're limiting the areas that you can move in. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, 1C still gives you that way out, though. So you could still save $2 million and go 1C. That's still always that'll be on the table for, for some time. It's not like that's just going to if you made a decision today, it's not like it's forever gone with the way we're trying to package this to give you that flexibility, because we recognize that as well.
And I gave the sustainability one because, you've heard Jesse talk a lot about, these metrics are built to go the distance, right? When you take one step back, you see the reimbursements drop significantly. In the case of Eversource locally, it's that 25 EUI, right? There are lots of decisions we can make to get the overall first cost of the building down. But once you drop from 25 to say 30, you lose a chunk, right? And once you drop from 100% geothermal to 75, you lose another chunk. So you're always trying to maintain that balance.
Right, but those numbers are in this. I appreciate that. And
there are some numbers that aren't in there.
Okay.
I just want to make that clear. So when you're looking at what the cost of this system is on the overall project, we're talking a 700 plus per square foot dollar value. 100 of that would be option one. The difference between these two is about $13.63 a square foot. The difference between them is also, you could put solar on this and you're offsetting all but 3 EUI worth of energy, or you could step down to option 1C, and I think we're 31.
Yes.
Yeah, 31.
So then there's 3 times as much ongoing energy that you can't offset, or you need to offset through some other means, and that's an ongoing cost that isn't captured. So the operating cost is not based on offsetting it with the 22 EUI. That's based on the operating cost if you don't offset.
Nothing at all confusing about that.
But I think, so, Bill, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure you get your question answered. I'm not sure. So, I think what you're saying, if we go with option 1A, right, and I got the same feedback from town meeting, right, which is $170 million. Oh my gosh. Like, what are we looking at here? So, if we need to, and we want to as a committee, it's our job to really look at where are the opportunities that we have to be as responsible in all ways as possible. So balancing our energy and environmental responsibility with our fiscal responsibility. If we go with option 1A, are there other big levers we haven't made a decision on yet where we could get this number down from, and I know 170 is an estimate number anyway, but we can get it down from 170. If we go with option 1A, can we get down from 170 to 165 or something? Like, where are we? Is this is a big decision when it comes to cost. Is it the last big decision, or what are the other ones where we'll see that opportunity?
Can you go back one slide?
Was that?
So,
No, yeah, absolutely.
so the most impact is to go with option 2, which we're not revisiting.
No, hang on. I'm
But my point is,
not talking about, not HVAC.
Not environmental.
Yeah.
Right, so we make a call, and then later, are there other things that we'll decide on that have nothing to do with HVAC and mechanical?
so I'd say
where
HVAC is one of your biggest decisions because the HVAC system not only drives the mechanical cost, but also the electrical cost.
Okay.
Right? So that, even though we're showing you the mechanical cost, it's intertwined with all the electrification of your building itself. And so that is the single biggest driver overall cost. Scope-wise, there's always reductions in scope. Right now, we've talked about the ball field in terms of the PE field. You know, is it fenced? Is it not fenced? Where do the roads go? Are they paved? Are they not paved? Are they permeable? Are they not permeable? You know, what fields do we put in there? Do we put canopies or not canopies? So there's lots of site-driven decisions, but the building itself, you've made that major decision of the size of the building, right? Here's the program that we've established. And in any feasibility study, we add decisions along the way. And so I want to re-anchor the group to that point. You know, you've made the decisions about the grade configuration. We've made the big decision about location. We're now making the decision about the size of the building. You know, there's little variations that, you know, Bob will present when we get to the end of schematic design, but we're essentially locked in with the size of the building. HVAC is the next big decision. And then after that, whether you go CM at risk or general contractor delivery will be your last major one besides reducing overall scope of a project. So you can pick finishes and the changes and how you fit out your building. Those also come with life cycle costs. As a simple example, VCT floor, right? It's the cheapest floors, but then the staff has to wax it and maintain it and do that all the time, right? And so there are other products that don't require that ongoing maintenance cost, but they come at a higher upfront premium. Some towns are going with rubber floors, some towns are going with LVT, luxury vinyl tile, because they want those things invested early on because they offset some of the ongoing maintenance costs. So there are other opportunities, but they come with other offsets with additional long-term costs.
Yeah, the issue is the difference between the capital budget and the operating budget, right?
Right, absolutely, yeah.
And where do you shift the cost?
So we're lowering the operating budget by doing these things, but we might raise the capital.
Bill?
Do we have a timeline, you may have said it, on when the incentives might come in, the federal incentives? How MSBA is going to view those? There's no timeline for that, right?
There's no
It's just a
timeline,
guess.
because they used to, previously, about 8 years ago, they shared in the incentives. So when they came back to the town, the MSBA took half, and or they took the prorated version of whatever your reimbursement rate was. They took their portion back, and you guys took the rest. They then changed that about 8 years ago, but that was when it was $65,000 per project, right? It's now jumped up to a couple $100,000, or in the case we're talking about now, millions. And so I was even talking with Eversource today because the MSBA is asking for all that data. And like, are they up to something? Are they trying to change the rules? And I don't think they are with Mass Save, but the IRA is a game changer when you're talking about a potential $7 million. And so they're taking their time to see how it's playing out, because that's significant, because they're also like towns are trying to balance spreading their program around, and if they can then deal with $7 million per project that they don't have to recirculate to the towns, they can help more towns. So that's a bigger deal for them and why they're going to take their time making a decision on that.
So, okay. Because that's a huge chunk. That could be a place where suddenly $2 million appears in the project that we can use or not use.
But where you get it
But we
here, they
don't
may
know.
take it there. It may
Right,
wash
right,
itself out.
Right, that's the problem, you don't know.
Right, you don't know that.
It probably is worth noting, though, it's a different bucket, but the IRA funds that towns receive now that are not related to sustainability, but related to actual escalation of materials and everything, the MSBA has not touched at all. It goes to 100% to districts, they're not trying to claw that back. And those are sizable numbers as well. It's a little bit different, it's within the same title, but the MSBA is pushing sustainability and healthy materials as well, so I think they're very aware not to de-incentivize districts from making these choices.
But other than availability issues, which is real, is there potential we could have an answer 2 weeks from now on that test drill, the test? No. I mean, even though it can be done in a day or two, there's no one available to
I
do
don't
that.
think there's
I don't
anybody
think so.
available
Yeah.
who would be willing to
Come up.
do that right this minute like
Yeah.
that.
Right, I mean, I think from our standpoint, it's a couple of months from whenever you say go, right? Because whenever we can assure there's money there for you guys to authorize the contract, we would have to schedule the drillers, have them come out and then do the report and then feed that back to Jesse to reconfirm the well. So timing is important now if we're able to try and do this, because I did want to ground everybody back with the schedule. So we're in the narrowing phase of the major scope decisions, which is this month and next month. So between May and June, we're making these big decisions about the mechanical systems, the contractor delivery method, and then at the start of July, the design team is finishing their design to then price it up. So at the beginning of August, you're making a decision on what you want to recommend the budget to be, and then we ferry that around town to the other boards. And by the end of August, that's all submitted. So town meeting may be in November, but the decisions are done by the beginning of July and then finalized at the beginning of August. So I just want to anchor that.
Since you're going with, theoretically, if you're going with a heat pump option anyway, if you do 1A, you could always put 1C on your VE list.
Of course.
That you have to do anyway as part of the process. So you could always have that anyway captured
I'm
and
not sure.
carried.
What is VE?
The value engineering is with a
Cost
process
reduction.
that, cost cutting. The process at MSBA, they're gonna be looking for us to submit with the package, the list of value engineering options that were looked at. And this could always live on that list, and probably should.
Yeah, doesn't bother me.
But if you start here, then there's really no VE from there.
And just to put dates to everyone, we're coming back in 2 weeks on May 23rd to talk about exterior massing, start to talk about materials a little bit as it relates to the exterior. We're coming back on the 13th to talk about the interior. We can have similar conversations about opportunities to reduce costs in both of those conversations. But essentially, by the time we're back with you on the 27th of June, we're reviewing the package that we're planning to send to the estimator. Then we're finalizing that and putting it in his hands. At that point in mid-July would be when we'd want to have the results of that conductivity test, because it's really you're here or you're here, and then you're plugging the number of wells into the process that the estimator uses to determine the cost.
Yeah, even if we had that information at that point in time, it's pretty easy for us to make a quick flex and figure out what the difference would be.
So, a few more questions before I can provide my opinion. So if we go with option 1A today, are you saying that there's still the flexibility to 2 years from now, let's say, we look at the funding and say, no, we can't do 100%. We'll have to go to option 1C. So are you saying we can do that?
Yes.
And that is good, but then by picking option 1A, we are setting an expectation for an EUI of 25. And if we then pick 1C, then we are raising the EUI.
Correct.
So from a perception standpoint, that may not go down very well. So then I ask myself, what's the likelihood of having to go to option 1C? It's not a small likelihood in my opinion. because there's just so many variables, you know. I'm a geotechnical engineer, so you know, it's I think about the variability in ground conditions, where bedrock is, how much water is being generated. So likelihood of going to option 1C is not small. So why not just set the right expectations right from the outset and pick option 1C is what I'm thinking. It's also a lower cost. So from that perspective, my vote is with option 1C.
No, my original thinking had aligned with Jen's and Leah's. I think it's a difficult decision. I see, like, if the IRA incentive comes in, that it does make it more advantageous, and there is an opportunity for us to save on the cost. I know it's an upfront cost, but potentially we get the savings after. I also feel like it's important to note that the it's not listed on this side, but it's on the other side, that the annual maintenance cost is lower. So I think in the long run we do end up saving some extra money there over the life of the building. So I still feel like option 1 is my preference. But I also hear what you're saying about 1C and setting the expectation.
So I think that the challenge to this is, as we all know, right, is that we're trying to do two different things at once, which is we're trying to make the what we think are the best decisions for the building and the people who are going to occupy the building, but then also think about the fact that we have to go in front of, you know, some number of hundred of voters of town meeting and be able to tell them this story in a way that will get them to accept it. And as I look at this table, every time I mean, I've obviously looked at it a lot, and what keeps striking me is that even if you take out those IRA incentives, you've got a higher upfront cost for option 1A, but overall life cycle cost projects to be lower. So from an overall fiscal perspective, you'd say that option 1A, actually, even again, before we get to IRA incentives, is fiscally the better option. And I'm not averse to work, but it's going to be a lot more work to explain that to everybody, that we're spending $2.4 million more dollars to have the lower EUI, also the lower life cycle cost, so that over the life of the project, this actually will be less expensive. That being said, I also can't sort of sit here and make the challenge of communicating that message the only reason why I would go back to option C, and I think that's the only one that actually pulls me back to option 1C. So I think I prefer option 1A. I thought I preferred option 1A. When Dan mentioned that very good suggestion about the option 1C on the VE list, that made me prefer option 1A even more, because Jagrut, I think your point is extremely valid, that it's not a small chance that we're going to have to go there, but if we do have to go there, it's yet another example of where we're going to have to explain what the decisions are we're making, why we think they're in the best interest of the town and the project, and go from there. But I do think that given the way these cost numbers shake out, I think I personally have to lean towards option 1A, even though it's going to make the sort of ticket number on the town meeting warrant higher.
Yeah, I think if we take out the annual operating cost, if you look at the replacement cost and the Mass Save incentives, and then you look at the system first cost, once you put that together, it's actually a difference of about 0.9 million instead of like the bigger difference. You know, just
right.
Once again, just looking kind of capital and incentives, right? And taking away the maintenance, since that's a completely different bucket, right? You're still looking at a difference of about 0.9, which I think is easier to explain than the 2.4. Yeah.
I think the other added complication is that even if all of these incentives come to pass, which who knows, it doesn't come back to the overall cost of the building per se. The money comes back to the town, but the project still costs $17.7 million in HVA, you know, in, what are we talking about, HVAC systems. We just recoup the money back to the town. So that's a complicated piece too that I think folks don't understand. If something comes in under budget, it doesn't mean that the money just doesn't get spent. You know, it's not like we get a refund. And I think that's a complicated piece.
Well, and this one's even harder because
Yes.
this isn't under budget. This is a rebate that is, you know, Marathon came in under budget, and what we could say is we borrowed less money
Right.
than
Folks
we
thought we'd get
appropriated.
$100 million
right?
back.
That's how
It wasn't-
we manage that. In this case, it's not even that.
Right.
It's we're not even going to borrow less. We're going to get it back in a rebate that does eventually roll back up to offset other costs, but it's not like you're going to be able to see a line item that says,
Right.
we said it was going to cost 165 million, we got 7.1 million, subtract out, we didn't, I mean, it's not going to work
The
that way.
borrowing will
Well, you
still
can,
be
you
borrowing.
can, you can simplify that. I mean, at the end of the day, you are technically borrowing less, because you said as you said, every town aggregates, right? You're borrowing
Yeah.
50 million for this job and 20 million for that job, and when you get that $7 million back, you didn't need to take as much long-term borrowing. And there's a difference between the short-term band borrowing and then long-term borrowing. So I think that's,
And I think
can
when we
simplify that
when we
message.
presented at town meeting, right, or leading up to town meeting, I think we will simplify it, right? Which is to say, remind everybody that this is the appropriation number, but this isn't the actual cost, and we'll put in MSBA reimbursement, we'll put in these reimbursements, we'll put in all of those, so that, I mean, people aren't gonna learn the nuances of municipal finance before November's town meeting. God, please don't. But but like that's how we're gonna have to illustrate it for them. So you're right. But if we do get specific questions about like, so does it reduce? It gets a little murkier. But yeah. I think that, well, so it sounds like there are no outstanding questions that we can get answered reasonably by the 23rd. So, is there any objection to providing some direction to about which option we want to start to pursue?
Well, the only thing I'll add is that I appreciate the way you laid this out, showing the certainty of the first cost. But you went a long way to point out the uncertainty of whether that IRA incentive will ever show up in our town's pocket. So I appreciate how you did that, because I think that's a much more fair way to look at this. So thank you for doing it that way.
Trying to be as unbiased as I can about it.
I mean, it would be gravy if we get it and if we can
Correct.
keep it, but
Yeah.
I think the first cost is certainty. Thank you.
Thank you.
So do you need a vote?
to you.
I don't think we have unanimity, so I think we probably should do a vote, right? Yeah.
The motion would be to recommend option, insert chosen option here to the designers to move forward.
Okay. Motion to recommend option 1A to the designers moving forward. With 1C and the V. There we go.
Value engineering list, right?
EV.
B.
All I can think of is electric vehicle.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion for option 1A by Leah, second by Mike. All those in favor?
Wait, with the
What?
option, with the VE.
Sorry, with option 1C included on the value engineering list for consideration as we enter the value engineering phase. Thanks. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, then, got it, and Chris doesn't have to do math, because we all voted the same way.
Leah, Mike, 6-0.
Well, and the difference was the VE is 1C, so that
Yeah.
leaves the flexibility to go there if we
Yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, Jesse can breathe a little bit.
Okay. Y'all can breathe a little bit.
Thank you.
We bring Bob back over to the table. Jesse, thank you. That was,
Thanks for your
a
time.
ton of work went into that. I know for you and for everybody, I saw a lot of those iterations, so we really appreciate it.
Obviously,
Obviously,
if there's more
we're,
questions, feel free to reach out. I'm gonna actually bail and go have dinner with myself.
okay, enjoy.
See y'all.
Thanks, Jess.
Okay, so the next, so if we could hook back to the, we need Chris's laptop again, right? 'Cause we need the spreadsheet.
Sorry.
So I want to add a little bit more context also to what Chris was outlining in terms of the cost and where we come up short. You know, he mentioned that the school department can move some money. That is, I want to make sure clear for people who might be watching, that is due to the fact that some of the traffic study work that was done informs more than just this project and informs the campus-wide study. So that's where that money comes from.
Yes.
It's not like we're just shifting stuff around.
No, it represented 40% of the cost of the traffic study.
Right, and so that fits within the four corners of that appropriation, so easy enough to transfer that. I have, just for the committee's benefit, I have reached out to the town manager because it leaves us, as Chris mentioned, short $20,000-ish, and to see if there might be other avenues where we might be able to locate that $20,000. He appropriately thought that given what we're talking about, that places where that he could check would be places like DPW or the engineering department. Thus far, I do not have an answer back as to whether or not that is possible, but I thought it important for what we're gonna do tonight, because I think whatever we may choose to give direction that says, let's do this, and if we come up with the other $20,000, let's also do this. That is an option that we could do here, because that'll likely happen well between now and May 23rd. So with that, Chris, what we're looking for here, can you do like a real quick run through the line items and numbers again?
Yes.
So overall, we had, of the remaining wish list, right, we had this in 3 columns, just to refresh everybody. There's likely, potential, and then deferred to DD. So the hydrant flow test, we said we deferred to DD. We based that on the marathon, so that's in the don't have to do it now category. The test pits, we're
Remind
looking...
me again what DD stands for.
Oh, design development, so post-town funding vote. So essentially, we take the more conservative assumption as it relates to requiring a fire pump and a storage system like we did at Marathon, so we'll save the $1,300 or so to run that test at this point. There's also a shelf life on that as well, so waiting is fine. The test pits themselves, this would be a percolation test to understand, how well the water drains on the site. That's the thing Chris was referring to earlier on, that we're talking to a contractor to get pricing, and this includes both a budget for the contractor to dig, plus the engineering to go out and understand the subsurface soil. There was a plug for the Concom sub-consultant permitting. As you know, you authorized us to do a wetland study on the vernal pool locations, and so this is a placeholder amount. The item we're going to talk about shortly is the Thornton Tomasetti Eversource proposal, and Chris has broken it into 2 categories here. The kind of need to move forward with, or in an ideal world of $7,000, and then there's an optional $13,000. All things being equal, if there was additional money available, we would also dig for more test pits to fine tune where ledge may be on site or the boulders. We're going to go with the assumptions. We have a lot of data from what we did at the Marathon School, so we'll push those test pits to post-town funding. So that $21,000 here we can kind of live without. So we're focusing on these first 2 buckets, which are the likely needed now, and then the potential if we can get additional funding. The remaining few are just a couple of miscellaneous legal expenses when they review the town funding agreement. If there are some other costs leading up to town meeting, plug there about $4,000, and then this geothermal test well. So these items in these first two columns are where we think it would be prudent to spend the money should we have it available. And the one item we can kind of live without is the Thornton Tomasetti second half of that proposal. Based on the available funds, we would prioritize the geothermal well and the test pit location for Perks as the more important decisions.
And how much money came from the campus study into the traffic? Okay,
23,600. So we had 68,000 left to spend against the wish list of 90,000 that's in front of us here.
Yeah, I want to say it was 41.5 was originally came out of that study, and then an additional 23.6 came out.
So the desire is to find more money for the test well, and then the request tonight is what to move forward with as it relates to the Mass Save and Thornton Tomasetti study.
And just a caveat on the Thornton Tomasetti proposal, they do include that if we select only some of the option, they reserve the right to revisit. So it may be that the vote, if we make one tonight, would be directing us to engage them on the specific tasks, and then we would refine that in a future proposal.
So this fee proposal breaks down as the committee's already signed the MOA to enter into the Mass Save program. So the first item of the task one is a requirement. So that 4,000 is a mandated requirement, and in which case it's a total of 8,000. Eversource is paying half, and you're paying half for that first task. We requested a few different HVAC systems or tasks. Task 2 was a peer review study of the mechanical systems, but that was really redundant with the presentation that you received tonight, which was a deep dive onto all those systems. So it's not something that has to be done. If you were struggling for additional data and feedback, that was an additional resource you could pursue. So we don't think that we need to pursue that at this point. Life cycle costs, which is the LCCA, is another task you could have them help with, but Perkins' team is also doing that as part of their base study proposal. So again, this was just another look at it from a different set of engineering. One thing about geothermal and all these other systems, as you go more into the net zero world, there's a lot of new data out there and a lot of different engineers' points of view, and so it's just another data point that you can pull together. And not to say we can't have those conversations at a later date. Chatting with Perkins, they mentioned that the plug load analysis may be something that would provide value of really trying to hone in on the EUI of the building. So the thought tonight is that, schematic design, task 1 is a requirement, but perhaps task 3 would be the one item that may produce some value to the design team of something they're not undertaking on their own.
And just to clarify, the items below that are called future scope, as part of the Mass Save program, you continue this through design development. So they continue to do evaluations, but that would be covered as part of the funding vote, as part of the authorization that the town does should the project move forward. And in terms of Mass Save's cost, they fund it at a 50% level up to $10,000. So it's possible that some of that would also be reworked if we eliminated task 2, both items for task 2, but we'd have to re-engage with Mass Save and Thornton Tomasetti to confirm what those numbers are at the end of the day.
So if we choose to eliminate the task 2, where does that put us in terms of what we can afford to do?
So right now, what we're showing here on this sheet is the $7,000 here.
Oh, so that's just the recommended stuff.
So what we're saying is go forward with task 1, and task 3 is the optional go forward. So that's the 7,000. So we're saying we'll table task 2 and 2A, 2B, and that we would suggest going forward with task 1 because it's a requirement, and then if we are willing to, if we can get $3,000 is not enough money to do the test well, so we might as well go forward with task 1 and 3.
Go back over the spreadsheet. So if we don't find this additional $20,000, is there a scenario where we can do the test well?
We could, it's,
I don't
I mean,
think
they're
so.
all, they're
I think
all,
we're
I'd say
just
the
a
short
little
answer
bit
is no.
short.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what, okay.
These are plugs, you know, I mean, I don't know exactly what the Concom, but I think it's close enough.
That's
The-
pretty
the
close.
permitting, and same with legal, you know, you may shave a couple of grand in these, but it's not enough to overcome the shortfall.
And if you click down, just, yeah, it's selecting these, we're at 50,000, 716. We need to, I think we need to do the percolation test. We'll have a better understanding of the we have the designer proposal for that, but we don't have the construction number, so that's a plug right now. So might get really close, but I think we'd still be a little bit short.
Other questions?
So we could vote tonight on just task 1 and 3 to expend for task 1 and 3, and then hold off on the other one until we see if we're able to source the 20,000, and then the test wells could be done. Is that right?
Probably want to add the test pits into that.
And the yeah. Okay. And that would be enough money. I feel like I'm doing math now. It doesn't equal. I feel like we still don't have enough money. Is that
I have
right?
the second copy of it, so I'm just going to delete the amounts out of the. So if we move forward with, if we delete the 13,000, but we continue with everything else that's on the list, we would have 50,716 remaining. But
10,000 short.
It'd be 59,200, so you'd still be short.
Short, yeah.
So if you wanted to move forward with just the Mass Save program, we can just do the 4,000 and ignore the plug load. We can always do that at a later date too. There's nothing magical that has to be done now. You know, we can dial that in during design development, at the start of design development.
So this part can be put off till the 23rd, correct, at the latest? I'm just wondering if we can
Can we wait on this until we know
talk
how much money we
to
have?
town hall, try to get, yeah, exactly, try to get a little bit more, and
Yeah.
just vote on the first column, since that has to happen, right, so those 18,000.
Is that,
But we don't, oh, you mean?
or would you be comfortable with that?
The contractor part.
Yeah, so, yeah, in terms of critical path, the Mass Save can wait. The test bits here, if we could, you know, authorize a not to exceed $6,000 number on that, we could move forward with getting the test bits scheduled and working with a contractor.
The way that it's working right now is we're finding this, we basically have a local contractor we're trying to get involved. So my concern would be that he's gonna say, okay, I'm ready. And we're not gonna be
What do
ready.
you,
at
what
that
do you
moment.
need us to vote on tonight versus what can wait till the 23rd?
I think we need the $6,000 for the test pits as a not to exceed.
And is that it?
I think that.
We don't have the money for the
Yeah.
geothermal well, so.
No. So, is it everything in column C plus the test pits?
No.
So,
This is a forecasted budget
so
of the road.
right now, the only thing you absolutely need us tonight to vote to authorize is the test pits not to exceed $6,000.
Yes.
Yep.
And everything else can wait till the 23rd,
Yes.
when we will hopefully have more information about monies available to us.
And assuming
Yep, and
the
what
consensus
we
of the committee, we can go back to Mass Save and Thornton Tomasetti and get a revised proposal that includes only task 1 and 3, so that you would have that in front of you when we come back.
Okay, let me break that into two different things. So, first and foremost,
You were right.
Can I
We only need the test bits
can I
tonight.
see,
The rest
can
of it can wait.
I get a motion to move forward with the test pits in an amount not to exceed $6,000?
So moved.
Second.
Give that one to Mike, second to Leah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, then it's unanimous, 6-0, so carries. You don't need direction on anything else at the moment.
No, once the money's available, then we can talk about the rest
Okay,
of it.
and we will continue to effort figuring out if the money is available.
Who is Mass Save?
Mass Save is a conglomerate of the utility companies in Massachusetts, so Unitel, Eversource, and National Grid, and Columbia
And
Gas.
we're going down the road they want us to go down. The road the governor wants us to go down. the MSBA wants to go down, and those two people back there wants us to go down.
Yes.
What we voted at town meeting wants to go down. So why can't we go back to Mass Save and says, hey, we're a little bit short here. Can you do a little bit better? Has anybody ever asked them?
Well, they're paying up to 10 grand, so that's this number here. So right now, it was on us to pick the a la carte menu, right? So what they're saying is task one is if you want to be part of the program, it costs you $4,000, we'll pay $4,000 of it, 50-50 split. And then the more you a la carte it, the less that 50-50 split gets, right? Because the more you add to it, those are optional things. So of the baseline services, they're going to split it evenly-ish up to 10,000.
I'm just thinking from 50,000 feet, this is going to be, because of what we just voted tonight, probably one of the more involved, you know, not net zero, but energy saving projects in the state, school project. So why aren't they providing more incentive for dummies like us to do this? I don't understand.
No, they're providing access to have peer reviews done that, you know, either validate or challenge the design team or educate the committee. And so those are these other tasks that are there. They spend more of their money on the rebate because they don't want to, they want you to do the engineering and designing with your consultants. They're saying that we'll help you study it a little bit. We're giving you the carrot at the end when you get there. And that's the way the program works.
They have changed that program. That program used to be 100%, and they felt that some towns would use that and then they'd back out. So they felt that everybody should have some skin in the game, so to speak, on it.
And it's
unfortunate it's kind of passed backwards because they actually want us to do this. And we actually want to do it. But
that's why the tail end rebate is so good.
It's a government working folks.
For clarity, it's an established program, not that you enter into, not a negotiation with them about what you receive.
Right. There's no negotiation. That figures.
Okay. So
we're just debating whether.
Yeah, the updates we have are pretty small, and we're liable to come back with other updates that may impact these, so I think we'd rather come back.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that's...
Yeah.
So then that would be the conclusion of our agenda. Our next regular elementary school building committee will be Tuesday, May 23rd, right back here in HCAM. If there is nothing else, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I go.
Okay, motion by Leah, second by Mike. All in favor of adjournment?
What is it, 9 o'clock?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And we are adjourned at 8:37.